Order of business. State of play of negotiations with the United Kingdom. I call the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker.
Buongiorno, Presidente.
Good morning, President. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen.
Rich in speeches. I started with my State of the Union address on the future of Europe in this very House, where I laid out the roadmap for a more united, stronger and more democratic Union. This debate on building a more united, stronger and more democratic Europe continued at the Sorbonne in Paris. President Macron gave a very bold and a very European speech that I would like to congratulate and thank him once again. Prime Minister May's speech, on the other hand, was about separation. In Florence, she struck an optimistic tone on the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the Union. When it comes to Brexit, we still cannot talk about the future without any real clarity. This is because the condition of Article 50 and the mandate given to us by the leaders of the EU27 are very clear. We first need to agree on the terms of the divorce, and then we see if we can lovingly find each other again. The Prime Minister's speech in Florence was conciliatory, but speeches are not negotiation positions. And as Michel Barnier, the Commission's excellent chief negotiator, said last week, work still remains to be done. We have not yet made the sufficient progress needed. The negotiator made good progress on citizens' rights, but the indispensable role of the European Court of Justice in guaranteeing those rights still needs to be agreed. I am pleased that Prime Minister May and her team recognise that the UK has financial obligations which it must respect. The devil will be, as always, in the detail, but the taxpayers of the EU27 should not pay for the British decision. And when it comes to Ireland, we can only talk of solutions that fully respect EU law and the Good Friday Agreement. I will not go into any more detail here, as negotiations continue next week, and Michel will complete what I was just saying. For those that think that the UK should just go over Michel Barnier's head, I remind them that the Commission has been appointed by the 27 member states, and my choice of Michel Barnier had been welcomed by them. He acts on their behalf on the basis of clear negotiating mandates, and he will report to them at the next European Council. Until now, I can't say that we are ready to enter the second phase of the negotiations. Mr.
President, after the departure of the United Kingdom, a page of European history is being turned and another is emerging to decide the future that we are to determine as 27. For the moment, we've put crucial questions off to an uncertain future. For too long, we've been indulging in long institutional debates rather than talking clearly to Europe's people about what the Union is for and where it's going. All that must change and is changing. Debates on the future of Europe are multiplying across Europe, and that's a good sign. It's a good sign because by holding these debates, we are showing the health and strength of Europe's democracy. That's what we wanted to see as a Commission when we launched the White Paper on the future of Europe and the various think pieces and citizen dialogues that are proliferating in every corner of the continent now. But we shouldn't scatter our efforts, which is why I wanted to put the public debate in the context of a structured route map with specific proposals This route takes us up to the 30th of March 2018, where a summit in Romania will allow us to give our views on the future of Europe, a Europe that we're prepared to defend and to build together as 27. Our future is not Brexit, our future is Europe. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, President. And now, the European Union's negotiator, Michel Barnier, also the negotiator supported by the European Parliament, supported by the working group made up of parliamentarians chaired by Guy Verhofstadt. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, President. And thank you to the Parliament, beside President Juncker, to have the opportunity to express my views today. President, ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, Mr. Matti, I'm very pleased to be here beside Mr. Juncker, and I thank him for his support and personal confidence in me. And then beside Matti Maasikas, whom I congratulate on the quality of the Estonian presidency for the last few weeks. Now, we were in this hemicycle together on the same subject on the 5th of April this year, at the time when you adopted your first resolution on Brexit. So you laid down the political objective for these negotiations, as the European Council had done under the impulse of President Tusk by adopting shortly afterwards the very specific guidelines. Now, 6 months later, and the clock is marching forward, and a few days from the European Council on the 19th and 20th of October, once again we are assessing the negotiations. And your motion for resolution demonstrates today, beyond the specific subjects that it covers, the full involvement of the European Parliament in these negotiations, which often take place outside this hemicycle. But your Parliament will have the last word at the time of the ratification. Now, since the first day, honourable members, we have known that these negotiations are extraordinary, that they're very complex, that they're going to have very heavy human and social, legal, financial, technical and economic consequences. And often these consequences are underestimated. As the negotiator of the EU, it's up to the Commission, with your confidence, to negotiate on behalf of the 27 and all of the institutions of the Union. And our greatest asset, I can say, is of course our unity. We know that this unity cannot be decreed. It is constructed day after day by the transparency that we've decided with Mr. Juncker to implement every day through our public debate and through our mutual confidence. And President Jan, I'd like to thank you personally, and thank your coordinator for Brexit, Guy Verhofstadt, and the chairs of the groups and the Brexit steering group, whom I meet very often, yesterday again, for the quality and frankness of our exchanges. So, on the strength of your support, from the beginning of these negotiations, we are endeavouring to implement the mandate that has been entrusted to us by Council in full consistency with your resolution and with the guidelines adopted by the European Council. Now, this mandate is simple. It consists of agreeing with the UK as quickly as possible on the conditions of its withdrawal, an ordered withdrawal from the EU. So we have to agree on the conditions of the withdrawal and, of course, the principles, so that we can go on to the next stages of the negotiation. So you know that the three main subjects, and there are many others, and they're not insignificant, like Euratom, judicial proceedings, administrative proceedings, governance, markets, etc. But the main subjects concern, first of all, the citizens, 4.5 million people, and then Ireland, and then the financial settlement. And these three subjects do go hand in hand. They're indissociable. They're the three key subjects of this orderly withdrawal. Now, you say this in your resolution yourselves. As President Juncker just said, Prime Minister May, last Friday, gave us some openings in her Florence speech. And the key to the negotiations has started to reflect these openings in specific proposals and to make some clarifications, and I'll come back to them in a moment. So we've been able to move forward on our priority, which remains the protection of the rights of the citizens of Europe. And we agree as well on the common principles which will guide our response to the sensitive questions raised by the singular situation of Ireland. And alongside these positive points, to assess the state of play objectively, there are still serious divergencies, especially on the financial settlement. Now, on this matter that I already talked about here, things are also simple. We will never accept for the 27 to pay for what was decided on by 28. It's as simple as that. And the taxpayers of the 27 don't have to pay for the consequences of the decision that they didn't take. So, no more, no less. No more, no less. There are also divergences on the ways of guaranteeing these citizens' rights. We know, honourable members, because you represent them, that of course we share the concerns of these 4.5 million citizens of the UK and the other 27 member states who just want to continue to live and work wherever they are, living with their families, just like before Brexit. And this concern, you recall in your resolution, and it's aggravated by certain discriminatory measures that have been taken, that were taken a few months ago by the UK authorities, and we'll read about it. And so to guarantee these rights effectively, we want to have a direct application of the withdrawal agreement to make it possible for the authorities and the judges in the UK to base themselves on the withdrawal agreement, without which these rights might be amended in the course of time. Secondly, we need a consistent interpretation of the agreement on both sides of the channel that only the ECJ can guarantee. And beyond this question of governance, we want guarantees from the UK on family reunification and the use abroad of social benefits acquired in the UK. Now, on their second main point, Ireland and Northern Ireland. Well, the EU and the UK do recognize that Ireland is in a particular situation and that any solution is going to have to be informed by these special circumstances. As I've said several times, the solutions we have to find have to respect both the integrity of the legal order of the Union and the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. At this stage, it's a question of making certain of the specific procedures to continue sustainably various types of North-South cooperation that are provided for in this agreement, as well as the continuity of the common travel area. And that, once again, requires detailed work that we're committed to with the UK delegation in a constructive manner. So, ladies and gentlemen, you say very rightly in your motion for resolution, we haven't yet today, on these three indissociable subjects, key subjects, we have not yet achieved sufficient progress to undertake in full confidence the second phase of negotiations. First of all, on what would be a new transition period, a possible transition period, under conditions clearly defined by the European Council, and that you're very attentive to. And then a discussion on the framework of our future relations, our partnership over time in the future with this great country. The fifth round of negotiations will take place next week in Brussels, and our approach is constructive because we want to succeed. And an agreement both on the agreement of the orderly withdrawal and the discussion of the future relationship. Now with the UK, which will become a third country, presumably, because that's its choice, on the 30th of March 2019, we're going to establish an ambitious, sustainable partnership, of course, in terms of trade, because that's what they have requested. They want a free trade agreement under conditions that will be discussed. But beyond trade, in terms of security, of counterterrorism, defense, or in terms of research and innovation, and the faster we agree on this orderly withdrawal, the faster we'll be able to concentrate on this fundamental objective, which is in our common interest, the construction of this new partnership with the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe, which is based on fundamental principles of our Union. Unity, the interest of the 27 member states and the institutions. Our autonomy of decision, the integrity of our internal market, and the 4 freedoms of movement, which are the basis of our Union. And these 4 principles are at the very heart of our political ambitions from the beginning. And the UK is very familiar with them, because the UK has shared them for 34 years. They're not negotiable. Once again, as the German Chancellor said a few weeks ago, and as President Juncker reminded us, we already know that the future of the Union is much more important than Brexit. And that's the responsibility of the 27 member states and the European Parliament to build this future together, to take up the challenges that we are seeing every day that are serious and numerous. A page is turning. A page is going to turn. That was the sovereign choice of the UK, and we respect it. And it's up to us to see to it, as Mr. Juncker said, to write a new page for the European Union. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnier. I now call the President in Office of the Council, Matti Maasikas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Honourable members, President Juncker of the Commission, Chief Negotiator Barnier. This debate is taking place barely 2 weeks before the October European Council, and with still 1 round of negotiations to take place. The matters under discussion are serious ones, with impact on the rights of millions of citizens, on the budget of the Union, and on the continuation of peace in Ireland. Following the speech of Prime Minister May, September 22nd, we have noted a more constructive spirit, and it seems providing a new momentum to the negotiating process. However, we can assess progress only based on official negotiation. What actually matters is the position paper presented at negotiations as an official position. When reviewing progress, we take as benchmark the guidelines set by the European Council held on April 29th and supplemented by the negotiating directives of the Council adopted May 22nd, both setting principles and priorities shared in the resolution of the European Parliament from last April. I am confident that this time again the views expressed in the resolution due to be voted right after current debate by your institution will tally with ours, as well as with the assessment of the Union negotiator Michel Barnier. Indeed, it is on the basis of this assessment that on 20th October the European Council will consider the state of play of these negotiations and how to move from there. We noted that the UK is now acknowledging the need for a transition of sorts. The principle of transitional arrangements is indeed recognised, subject to clear conditions set in the European Council guidelines I referred to before. A transition could be welcome in easing the impact of the withdrawal and mitigating the uncertainties affecting citizens and businesses. But again, in order to be able to consider transition in good time, we need far more clarity than what has been provided so far. Likewise, concerning citizens' rights, we do see an improved convergence on key rights, as well as on how to ensure that they can actually be enjoyed by European citizens in the UK on the basis of simple procedures. But a number of issues remain open, and there is not yet a satisfactory assurance that these rights will be implemented in a consistent manner on both sides of the Channel. Turning to Ireland and its unique situation, both sides are certainly close in terms of principles and continued support to the Good Friday Agreement and what could be achieved within its framework, as well as to the continued operation of the Common Travel Area and what it means for Irish citizens. But this is, however, not enough in terms of certainty. Last but not least, the financial settlement is also one of the key issues on which sufficient progress must be made before moving to the next phase of the negotiations. No doubt positive words have been said, but we are still awaiting concrete proposals. All this leaves us still wondering about the conclusion we can draw about the progress, an uncertainty that I read as well in the draft motion for a resolution before you. European Parliament resolutions are valuable for the Council. As noted before, there are still 15 days and one round of negotiation to go. I was glad to conclude the meeting of General Affairs Council, Article 50, on September 25th by noting that the EU27 is united, that we have a single line of negotiations with a clearly defined mandate, and we fully support the work of Michel Barnier. A certain new momentum has recently been instilled in the negotiation. Let's build on it. Let us achieve waterproof solutions for our citizens, for our businesses and for our union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much also for respecting the timing. Passiamo ora.
We now move on to the political groups. First, on behalf of the European People's Party, Mr. Weber.
And Mr. Commission President, dear colleagues, first, the top question I think for the moment is, who shall I call in London? Who speaks for the government? Theresa May, Boris Johnson, or even David Davis? By reading Johnson's attacks against his own Prime Minister, he shows the British government is trapped by their own party quarrels and political contradictions. First Florence, then Manchester. We are listening to a lot of speeches, but substance, dear friends. London is very creative in putting red lines on the table for pleasing their party supporters. However, they fail to give any solution for the voters and citizens. And I fully agree with Theresa May in at least one single point she said. We can do so much better than this. Theresa May, please don't put your party first. Put please Britain first. Put please the citizens first. And please no more speeches. Show leadership on content. And the best probably would be please sack Johnson, because we need a clear answer who is responsible for the British position. A second point, dear friends, dear ladies and gentlemen, is the perspective from the citizens in the European Union. They can see what leaving the European Union means. So we have a downgrading by the rating agencies. We have a lot of European companies who say we don't invest anymore. And the growth rate in Great Britain, when we look to the OECD data, is going down from 1.6% to 1%, so only half of the growth rate which we have today in the Eurozone. That is the result when you do a Brexit. And the third point, dear friends, I want to put on the table is now, what are we doing as the next steps? First of all, the British government has to understand that cherry picking is over. What we saw through the summer break was the British government was presenting a lot of new ideas, but with these ideas they showed that they want to keep ties, that they want to keep contact. They didn't explain us what leaving the European Union really means. And a second point is that we should not speak too much about a transitional period, because we are already in a transitional period, dear friends. We need clear results in 2019, otherwise the consent of the European Parliament is not guaranteed. A country outside of the Union cannot have the same advantages than a country which is a member of the club, dear friends. And that's the last 2 points. One is, it's I think obvious for everybody what Commission President and Michel Barnier underlined, that for the moment there is not sufficient progress on the negotiation on the table. So I think the EU leaders, the European Council, has to understand that there is no chance for stepping in the second phase of the negotiations. And finally, I want to thank Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier for their great job to keeping the European Union together. And I want to thank also Guy Verhofstadt for doing a great job for us as institution, as European Parliament, to bring our voice on the table. We are prepared and we can be proud of our job we did in the last month. Thanks so much.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. No blue cards, I'm afraid, because there are so many speakers on the list, and going to be a lot of requests to catch the eye as well. So now, on behalf of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, Gianni Pittella. Thank you very much, President. Now, when Theresa May arrived in Downing Street, she seemed to indicate that Brexit would take about 150 days and that it would be straightforward, whereas in actual fact there is a thick fog surrounding the negotiations, and as my colleague has just reminded us, the Conservative Party is riven with divisions. However, we must remain positive, because what is at stake after all are the rights of our citizens. And as the chief Brexit negotiator Barnier and President Juncker have reminded us, Prime Minister May made a more constructive speech in Florence, and we were very pleased to hear it. Having said that, as I say, there is still a lot of uncertainty surrounding the negotiations. And if you have a situation in which you're seeking a divorce, you have to decide on the terms first of all before you can embark on a future relationship. So exactly in the case of two spouses, that is what we have to do. So we have to talk about the withdrawal first of all, and then you can start to talk about a transitional period. And we have to decide whether or not there'll be a transitional period, but whenever such transitional period does come into force, and the four freedoms will apply, and the European Court of Justice will retain oversight, as President Juncker has reminded us, and the United Kingdom has been too vague and hasn't entered into any specific commitments. And when it comes to Northern Ireland, it's important to understand that the United Kingdom authorities want a single market, but at the same time they want a very light border, as it were, with the Republic of Ireland. But peace in Northern Ireland is a pillar of Europe, and I therefore urge the UK government to take a responsible approach to this very fraught issue. Now, on citizens' rights, I think that we are duty-bound to concede that citizens should enjoy all their rights, as should their family members, and we cannot countenance a situation in which the UK would strip those rights from citizens living in the United Kingdom and subject them to administrative procedures. And I can tell you on behalf of this political group, we will not accept a situation in which you have a second-class status for our citizens. And until those issues have been resolved, and until such time as the UK government has not entered into serious and irrevocable commitments on future negotiations, a new phase cannot commence. And I would say to the government and to Theresa May, we today will be voting on our resolution, and once again the European Parliament stands united thanks to all the efforts of Guy Verhofstadt, our negotiator, as well as the efforts of our friend Mr. Barnier and President Juncker. But if I may say the United Kingdom should follow our lead, the route that is balanced and moderate in our interests as well as in the interests of the United Kingdom.
Per il gruppo dei conservatori.
For the European Conservative and Reformers Group, Mr. Raffaele FITTO. Thank you, President. Colleagues, more than 6 months have now passed since the 29th of March, when the British Prime Minister invoked Article 50 for the exit of the United Kingdom. Over these 6 months, negotiations have not produced what we all hoped for. But as Mr. Barnier reminded us a moment ago, Mrs. May's speech in Florence represented timid and insufficient progress added to that in the negotiations, but it allows us nonetheless to be a little more optimistic about an agreement. It would be a serious mistake to try to divide either side or to try to achieve victory by one over the other. And we can't allow that because our companies and our citizens want certainty in their daily lives. They want an agreement for the closest possible relationship, one that is balanced in terms of rights and obligations, which is why, frankly, I don't think, having heard this morning's debate, among other things, that it's useful to argue about positions within a government. And it's not going to overcome the dissensions. That certainly doesn't make things easier. Mr. Barnier has a constructive approach, and it doesn't correspond to the approach that I've heard in subsequent speeches. As we need the right climate to get this important agreement. The United Kingdom is leaving the European Union, but not Europe. Things like immigration and terrorism, global security can and should be solved and dealt with only if we can all stand together, regardless of the legal positions that may divide one side from another. These are important challenges in the future that face us all, and we have to approach them responsibly. It's not long to 2019 now, and we can't afford the luxury of a failed agreement or too unambitious an agreement. The consequences would be bad for both sides. Our citizens wouldn't forgive us. Let us now ignore the differences between different institutions and the various reasons for disagreement with the British government. Let's get into the negotiations where it's details, not principles, that divide us. We all know that we have to avoid a physical barrier between Ireland and Northern Ireland. We all know that there has to be continuity in the peace process. And we all know that financial commitments entered into have to be respected. The interests of citizens of the Union and of British citizens who are residing on the other side of the future boundary have to be fair conditions, and we have to ensure that these things are subject to the principles of equity and reciprocity and non-discrimination. So we have to be a lot more realistic than politics often urges us to be. And let me be frank here. We have to find a compromise. We have to bear in mind that in 2019 the United Kingdom will be, in fact, a third country. In the ECR group, we are disturbed that Parliament, through this resolution, and I can understand the reasons why it should do so, hasn't accelerated into the second stage of negotiations. Because even the second stage doesn't represent a solution. In fact, it's going to complicate the situation. We have to decide clearly what the future legal framework is going to be for economic and commercial life, for our companies, and for the future relations between the European Union and the United Kingdom. We can't allow the productive and commercial system of the United Kingdom and the European Union be subject to total uncertainty. What's at stake here is the future of millions of workers and their families, and that must be safeguarded. At the same time, here too, as on citizens' rights. There is no solution in imposing a solution on the other side. This must be an opportunity for understanding, as we said here in the chamber a few months ago, and I'll say it again. Brexit has been decided by citizens, like it or not. It's not something to have a fight about. We hope that it can be an opportunity to set up future relations of the sort that this union seriously needs. That's the work, that's the commitment that we as European conservatives will be contributing to this debate as from today. Thank you. For the European Liberal and Democratic Alliance, Mr. Guy Verhofstadt.
First of all, I have to tell you that, and I say that also to Mr. Fitto, I deplore that we have to come to a resolution that is saying that there is no sufficient progress. Our idea, and I think also of Michel Barnier, was that in October we could see sufficient progress. But Mr. Weber is right when he is analyzing the situation. If you are at the other side of the negotiation table, there is a lack of clarity. There is even disunity. There are oppositions between Hammond and Fox. There are oppositions and divisions, I should say, between Johnson and May. It is difficult to make sufficient progress, and it's difficult to make the steps towards the second phase of the negotiation. So I deplore, in fact, that we are not capable to put for you before the plenary another resolution than the resolution of today. But on the other hand, it shows also the unity among ourselves. And I hope that we can keep, Mr. Fitto, this unity in this House, and even that you can join this unity when there is the vote within a few moments. Because this unity is absolutely needed. Parliament and Council, so not only Parliament, Parliament and Council, for once, I have never seen it, I have to tell you, in my political life, are going beyond national difference, are going beyond party obediences, and are really defending, together with the negotiator, the interests of the citizens in all 27 member states. And so my call to you and to everybody in the plenary is join this unity. Let's keep this unity. And in that respect, dear colleagues, I have three worries, 3 points that I want to that I think are needed to be addressed in this debate. The first is Northern Ireland. I have to tell you, I went to Northern Ireland. I was never in Northern Ireland. I was never in Belfast. But I went there, and I thought, yeah, it's already 20 years, not longer on our television screens. Problems are solved. It's a little bit like Berlin. The Berlin Wall, it disappeared, and everything goes well. Well, I can tell you, it was a shock to come in Belfast. Because the reality is that the problems are not over. There is peace due to the Good Friday Agreement. But there are still these tensions. There are fences of 12 meters high today in the 21st century. And I have to tell you, this Good Friday Agreement, to keep it is key. It's a ceasefire. It's a little bit a guarantee of a frozen conflict. And the worst thing what can happen is that we lose the peace that Europe has brought there in Northern Ireland with the effort we with the European Union have done. I stand next to these memorial monuments of young people, I stand there next to memorial monuments where you see the pictures of young people of 15, 16 years old who died in a conflict based on nationalism, based on extremism. And so to secure that this violence doesn't return, that is, I think, an absolute priority for our House. And that means, why not? And it's a question that I put forward to the negotiator. Why not this Good Friday Agreement attached then as a declaration to the withdrawal agreement that we are going to secure? And also, to be sure, let's not return to a border there on the island of Ireland, because then the violence will certainly return. So my second worry is about citizens' rights. So, you know, the so-called deportation letters that had been sent by the UK authorities a few times ago. There has been excuses by the UK government saying that it was a mistake, but I have difficulty to believe it. And why I'm saying this? When it comes to collectively securing the rights of EU citizens living in the UK authorities tell us that it's not possible. They don't know them. They don't know where they are. When it concerns to send a deportation letter, they find them. Yeah. And they find their addresses. So I don't think that really we can accept, and I want to tell that in all honesty and very calm, a situation in which 3 million of our citizens will need to ask for a settled status in Britain with a huge administrative burden. Our proposal is very simple. Let's recognise this collectively. Let's give the same rights for the people living in the UK now, EU citizens, as they have now. And let's do exactly the same for the UK citizens living on the continent. I'm asking myself, President, why we are still discussing this. This can, in fact, be solved immediately, recognising their rights, recognising the rights of all citizens. Finally, on the financial settlement, I will not repeat what you have said. We are fully in agreement with you. You cannot pay with 27 what has been committed by 28. And so to conclude, my last phrase. It's true, Theresa May, Mr. Fitto, have made a number of clarifications in her Florence speech. Not enough, let's be honest, also for you to say that there is sufficient progress. So what I'm hoping is that in her address now, tomorrow, in the Congress before the Conservative Party, she will bring further clarity, so that based on this further clarity, concrete proposals can be put on the negotiation table towards Michel Barnier. And finally, I hope for really, also from the ECR group, for a massive support for this resolution at the vote at May Day. Thank you.
For the Confederal Group of the United European Left, Nordic Green Left, Mrs. Anderson.
In all of its parts. That includes the parts where the consent of the people of Ireland, North and South, would be required to alter the constitutional position of the North. It includes the agreed areas of cooperation, environment, agriculture, tourism, health, transport and education, plus it allows for more. It includes the Bill of Rights, rights resisted by the DUP, and also, importantly, it includes conformity with EU law. The Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts includes, as this resolution recognises, being in the single market and the custom union. Britain should remain in the single market and the custom union, but if it does not, then the North of Ireland must. There are different ways that this could be done. In some form could mean the North of Ireland staying in the EU, or it could mean Irish unity. And the Good Friday Agreement has provisions for a unity poll, a right to decide. Otherwise, we are not upholding the Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts. This resolution is balanced with regards to citizens' rights and the financial settlement, and it is an important step forward in recognising that the requirements of the North of Ireland are different from those in Britain, hence the need for special status, or the need for the special circumstances to be taken into account. Finally, I would like to welcome the comments from Guy Verhofstadt that we will explore how to give the legal protection to the Good Friday Agreement in the withdrawal agreement. If you support the Good Friday Agreement, if you support the peace process, then please support this resolution. Thank you all.
For the Greens European Free Alliance Group, Mr. Philippe Lambert.
British citizens, my fellow European citizens, the clock is ticking, and you know where we Greens and European Free Alliance wanted your country to be, to remain at the heart of the European Union, but a majority of those British citizens who voted decided otherwise. And while we accept the result of the referendum, this decision will produce no winners. Not only the business we do with one another, but the interest of both the UK citizens and the EU27 citizens will be harmed by the separation. You know, it's British citizens who come to see me every week to alert me as to the damages that will be inflicted to your healthcare system or to the quality of your research in your top universities, where so many EU nationals are working day in, day out. And above all, both British citizens in the EU27 and UK citizens on the continent have been thrown in total disarray, and the Europeans in the UK having started experiencing administrative vexations without Brexit having even started. If we want to limit the inevitable damage that will be caused by this lose-lose situation, we should waste no more time and negotiate in good faith. But make no mistake about it, no deal by March 2019 would be the worst deal for everyone and first for respective citizens. Allow me at this stage to point to two contradictions in the positions of your own Prime Minister. The first concerns Ireland. How can she say, on the one hand, that there will be no border, and on the other hand, that she will take out the United Kingdom from the customs union, from the single market and from the jurisdiction of the ECJ? This will create a border, and I don't know where to place it, and at the same time respect the Good Friday Peace Agreement. The second contradiction is this idea that in order to make Britain global, it needs to cut its ties with the countries, its closest neighbours, with whom it shares history and geography. Rather than an impediment to be global, to be honest, I believe the European Union is the only way for European countries, including former imperial powers such as yours, to have any influence in a world where it barely represents 1% of the population. In the 21st century, more than ever, size matters. Let me conclude with a few words on democracy. As your Prime Minister explained, the decision to leave the European Union as a statement as to how you want your democracy to work. I take exception with the idea that only if the UK would leave the EU, decisions that affect your daily lives would be taken by people directly accountable to you. Who adopts EU law? On the one hand, this European Parliament, who is elected by and accountable to the very same people who elect your national parliaments. And on the other hand, the Council, that is 28 governments who are accountable to their citizens via their national parliaments. In other words, every EU law is decided with people directly accountable to you sitting at the table and taking part. But let's be frank with one another. What seems unacceptable to some is that in certain cases, Britain might be outvoted. That, I'm afraid, is the rule of democracy, one that your own government has no qualms invoking by remarkably overruling the majority of the pro-Remain majorities in Scotland and Northern Ireland. If democracy can only be had at nation-state level, I know many regions who would immediately aspire to become one. And indeed, and if a democratic union is possible, Mr. Farage, between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, then it certainly can be possible between European nation-states. Dear friends, a majority of the British voters instructed Her Majesty's government to negotiate Brexit. Let us respect that democratic vote and do just that without further delay. But if we want to be fair to those same citizens, let them, or at least those people who have been elected to represent them, have the last word on this story. When confronted with the result of that negotiation, who knows what they might ultimately decide. Thank you very much.
For the Europe of the direct freedom and direct democracy, Mr. Farage.
The really important issue of Brexit, I think European citizens, those that do take any interest in what happens here, will be stunned that Mr. Juncker comes here for his one appearance in the Strasbourg session this week, and there is absolutely no mention made of the dramatic events that have taken place inside a European Union member state that is allegedly a modern democracy. Now, one of the reasons that I one of the reasons that I always wanted Brexit was because I thought the system of lawmaking, whereby the Commission has the sole right to initiate legislation, was something that would in fact damage and in the end destroy any concept of national democracy. And yeah, I've called the European Union undemocratic, I've called it anti-democratic, but never, ever, in my fiercest criticisms here, did I think we would see the police of a member state of the Union injuring 900 people in an attempt to stop them going out to vote. Whether or not it was legal nationally for people in Catalonia to have a vote, surely people are allowed to express an opinion. We saw women being dragged out of polling stations by their hair, old ladies with gashes in their forehead. The most extraordinary display. And what do we get from Mr Juncker today? Not a dicky bird. In fact, previously we had that the rule of law must be maintained, and I think it is quite extraordinary to realise that this union is prepared to turn a blind eye. Can you imagine if the British police were to have roughed up a couple of Scottish National Party protesters, or if something happened against a pro-Brexit rally, you'd all be screaming blue murder. Indeed, the calls would be that the United Kingdom must go before the European Court of Human Rights, and yet with this you don't even want to talk about it. And knowing as I do your advanced plans, 7 of you member states here with your military police, your Euro gendarmerie force, all I can say once again is thank God we're leaving. Brexit was an act of liberation. It was a voice of national self-determination that cannot and will not be stopped. But through this negotiating process, I'm afraid from the start, you've treated us as if we're some kind of hostage. That unless we pay a ransom, unless we meet all of your demands, then you won't even have an intelligent conversation with us about trade heading on from here. There are no guarantees that whatever Mrs May says or does, that you will ever, even when we've met your demands, that you will ever come to us and want to have a sensible trade agreement. And I have to say that it is sad, in fact it was pitiful, to see the British Prime Minister in Florence. I've heard you saying that she's been conciliatory, that she's been grown up. People are happy with what she said. Actually, Mrs May, I'm sad to say, isn't worldly enough to recognise that when you face up to a bully, the one thing that you do not do is try to appease them. She's begging you to give her a transition period, and there's no guarantee that you will do it. So I do actually agree with the criticisms that I've heard around the room about the mixed messages coming out from the UK government. I just hope that in Manchester the Conservative Party start to say in public what they're all saying to me in private, that she's a waste of space, she needs to go. We need a proper Prime Minister who says to Monsieur Barnier, OK, here's a deadline, here's a date, we work towards that date. If we can't reach a sensible deal on trade and everything else, then we are simply leaving and reverting to WTO rules. This charade cannot go on for year after year. After all, we voted Brexit.
For the Europe of Nations and Freedom Group, Mrs Atkinson.
Agree with everything Nigel has said. The British people listen to you and they hear that you want us shackled to the ECJ and they say no. The British people see that you're getting an EU army, and given what happened in Catalonia on Sunday, most of you so-called leaders were silent on this matter. You saw what was happening with the violence against its people, its women, and some of them are children. And they wonder what it will be like under Mrs Merkel and also Mr Macron when they get their hands on the guns and the tanks. The British people say no. The British people say no. They voted to take back control of our borders, and you say no. The UK said yes to leaving the single market and the customs union, so you should just cut a deal on a free trade agreement. But you can't. Has Mrs May met Mrs Malmström, our resident former sociology lecturer who's in charge of trade? She's incapable of saying yes or no, because she's never worked in business. Last night at the Conservative Party conference, a former Brexit minister, with the Brexit secretary, David Davis, in the audience, said that the Brexit department are drawing up plans for a no deal. Well, listening to Mr Barnier today, they better get on with it, because that's what's going to happen. Mr Weber, you say who should you call in London? I agree with you. Mrs May will be gone soon. I suggest you get Boris or Jacob on speed dial. And Mr Verhofstadt, don't lecture us and try and rewrite history on Northern Ireland. I think it's you that's inciting violence sitting in this chamber. Last June, we voted to take back control of our laws, our courts, our borders and our money. Anything else is a betrayal of 17.4 million people. Watch and learn from Catalonia.
La parola onorevole Dodds, non iscritta.
Mrs. Dodds, not attached.
Sorry. I will focus on only one aspect of the resolution today, and that is my constituency, Northern Ireland. I am encouraged by agreement in Brussels, London and Belfast that there should be no hardening of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I am encouraged by reports of fruitful progress on the issue of the common travel area. However, it is not flexible or imaginative to claim that a trade solution can only be found if Northern Ireland remains inside the single market or the customs union. Let's be absolutely clear. Northern Ireland's Brexit solution will be part of the United Kingdom's Brexit solution. There can be no question of a deal that cuts us adrift from our most important market and erects barriers within the United Kingdom's single market. The interlinked nature of the Brexit negotiation means that we need to move swiftly to phase 2 of the negotiation for a full resolution on this issue. Northern Ireland is not a bargaining chip in these negotiations. Genuine concerns in my constituency should not be exploited in pursuit of every British pound. And finally, a word to Mr Verhofstadt, who claimed that Europe had brought peace to Northern Ireland. Peace in Northern Ireland was hard fought and hard won by its people and by the bravery of its security forces in the face of an awful terrorist campaign that killed thousands of our people. Europe has helped, but it has not been the sole arbiter of peace in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole González.
Mr. González Pons.
President, after listening to Mr. Farage, I've left behind the speech that I prepared because I have to answer to him even if he's going to leave. My country cannot accept lessons on democracy from people, from somebody I don't consider to be a Democrat, and the proof that he's not a Democrat is that he isn't even staying to listen to me. Mr. Farage means that I'm happy to see Brexit happening, because thanks to Brexit, we'll have the extreme right gone from this House. The only good thing of Brexit is we won't ever have to listen to Mr. Farage again. If he wanted to do a favour to the separatists in Catalonia, he's done the opposite, because I'm convinced that those who are endeavouring illegally to achieve independence in Catalonia, the last thing they wanted was the support of the extreme right in Europe, which demonstrates to all of us what is really happening in Catalonia and what the government of the country is facing. You had an opportunity to talk about Brexit in the UK and you didn't seize it. You prefer to talk about Spain rather than the UK, because concerning Spain, aside from shouting, you've got nothing to say. And talking about the UK, my parliamentary group is concerned, like Mr. Fisher, about Northern Ireland. And very concerned for Northern Ireland, because it's a special problem that requires a special solution and is going to demand the best of us. Honourable members, contrary to what Mr. Farage said, and some separatists in Catalonia, Spain is a consolidated democracy, a loyal partner, a good friend of the whole European Union that requires the help of everyone. And the only ones who we don't need are this extreme right, however much they want to join the party. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole Gualtieri.
Mr. Gualtieri.
Thank you, President. We are now in a decisive moment of our negotiations. A lot of time has been lost, and we now see a more positive dynamic. At the same time, a number of fundamental issues remain yet to be clarified and problems to be solved. For this reason, it is very important that the message that comes from this Parliament is clearly heard and understood. A positive conclusion of the first phase of the negotiation is possible, but we are not yet there. The Parliament is and will be open and constructive in its assessment, but we are and will be equally firm on our principles. First, of course, a full safeguard of citizens' rights, which is our first priority. The positive principle of direct effect of the agreement must be underpinned by an effective mechanism which allows the Court of Justice to ensure a consistent interpretation of its provision. Second, as we are safeguarding existing rights and not discussing future UK immigration rules, we will not accept to depart from any of the current provisions, in particular about future family members of eligible citizens that should have the same right as the current family member, about the declaratory nature of documents, about the need to avoid any burdensome administrative procedure, and on the possibility to export social benefits. On Ireland, our resolution is extremely clear, and on financial settlement, it is extremely important that the now shared principle, apparently, that all commitments made by the UK during its membership of the Union shall be honoured, this principle is implemented fully and consistently. On the basis of this short, let's say, analysis of the points, it is clear that despite some positive steps forward, a lot of work is still required in order to move to phase 2 of negotiation. So, as we say in the resolution, unless a major breakthrough takes place next week, the European Council should postpone its assessment of sufficient progress. By stating this obvious element, we are not closing a door. We are pointing out to a way forward that is fair for both the EU and the UK. In this respect, we have to be clear on the transition. First, it can be discussed and agreed only after sufficient progress on the withdrawal agreement. Second, it should be based on the full existing EU regulatory, budgetary, supervision, judiciary and enforcement instruments, and should, of course, fully include the free movement of citizens. Third, while some objective links between withdrawal agreement and transitional phase might be explored, any attempt of buying access to parts of the single market through concession on the financial settlement would be rejected. So we are in the middle of a very difficult journey. There is only one path, clearly laid out if we want to get to our final destination. The path is the one indicated by the EU, and we will follow you, Michel, along this way.
Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, President. For decades, during some very dark times, Europe was a good friend to Northern Ireland, without taking any side. I will always remember at the time of the ceasefires in '94, when I went with my other two MEP colleagues from Northern Ireland to meet with Jacques Delors, which brought about the peace programme, and during that time over €2 billion as extra funding to Northern Ireland and to the border counties in the Republic. However, in this resolution, to me, it is clear that you are now taking sides in Northern Ireland, Mr Verhofstadt. And let me make it clear to you, Mr Verhofstadt, the peace in Northern Ireland was won by the leader of my party, now Lord Trimble, and the leader of the SDLP, Mr John Hume, who took the brunt, and indeed took at the time when the other party leaders representing on both sides in this House, who are now the lead parties in Northern Ireland, stood on the sidelines and did nothing to help to bring peace in Northern Ireland. and in fact they have messed it up big time, which doesn't make the situation we have today any easier. Shortly after those ceasefires, can I say, by calling for Northern Ireland to remain in the single market and the customs union with the rest of the United Kingdom, Mr Verhofstadt is essentially calling for an international border to be placed between Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain. Let me make it very clear. I will not accept any attempt by anyone in this Parliament to use Brexit as an excuse to break up my country. At its heart, this proposal goes against the Belfast Agreement. The Parliament is mandated to protect and defend. The Belfast Agreement is clear. Northern Ireland is a full part of the United Kingdom, and we entered into the then EEC as one United Kingdom, and we will leave the European Union as one United Kingdom. This is, Mr President, a sad day for me. If the Parliament supports this text, it will be turning us back on decades of good relations with all communities in Northern Ireland. You can no longer, Mr Verhofstadt, be deemed to be neutral after this resolution. That is your mistake. It's a huge mistake. And today I have heard nothing new. Unless we have a change in the direction this is heading, we are heading for a crash. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole.
Ms. Wikström.
Grazie, Presidente. As chair of the Petitions Committee, it's my responsibility and duty to listen to and respond to the concerns of EU citizens. My committee has received a large number of petitions expressing grave anxiety about citizens' rights in a post-Brexit era. They all have something in common. They are all the result of the insecurity people feel caused that they have been thrown into due to a very unclear withdrawal of the UK from the European Union. Some of them have tens of thousands of signatures. From also the perspective of the Conference of Committee Chairs, let me just express that there is an immense task we are all aware of in front of us for all the committees. I know how important it is that realism and pragmatism is allowed to inform and shape the debate and the negotiations, and we are lucky to have an excellent negotiator in Michel Barnier. In this context, the European Parliament proposal of a transitional period is very much welcomed because it ensures that we have sufficient time to ensure that we have an orderly and civilised divorce at the end of the process, where citizens' rights are secured, both for the EU citizens residing in the UK and vice versa, the UK citizens residing on the continent. And I really look forward to a more dignified debate after this. I pay attention to Mr Farage, who has now left the room, that he is not willing to discuss Brexit. He wants to discuss anything but Brexit. I think it should have been raised as a point of order, and she should have been made aware by you, Mr Chair, to actually pay attention to what the subject is for today.
Ms. Spinelli. Thank you very much, President. This joint motion for a resolution we're about to vote on is one in which the European Parliament will express its opinion, namely that it is too soon to talk about progress on the behalf of European citizens, and the situation in respect of Northern Ireland remains unresolved. Now, we need to look at what will happen once we consider that sufficient progress has been made. We have a principle whereby nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Will we then be willing to ask the United Kingdom to put their whole future on standby whilst awaiting that final agreement in accordance with that principle? I fear that the government will take advantage of Brexit to rein back many freedoms here. I very much hope that there will be no compromises in this regard. We must protect the status of all European citizens with absolutely no strings attached, no conditionality. It is therefore crucial that we beef up the rights in other chapters that remain to be negotiated. We don't yet have any legal certainty, but we need concrete guarantees to safeguard the rights of millions of citizens. Thank you.
La parola
Mr. Smith.
President, thank you. I'm struck as ever by the unity of purpose across the Council and the Member States and indeed across this House amongst the EU27. I commend our coordinator, Michel Barnier, for keeping that unity in check. But where the EU is united against the UK, I assure you the UK is anything but united. I represent Scotland, was in this House. We desire to remain within our family of nations. 48% of the UK population want to remain. The idea that Theresa May leads a united government is a risible proposition, as we see on a daily basis from our own colleagues who are treating her as a Viking longship, that they're going to float out into the North Sea having piled as much nonsense onto it as possible, and then they'll set fire to it. They're fighting amongst themselves like ferrets in a sack, while the UK's national interest, however we define it, is ignored by them utterly. Shame on them. It is not good enough for Europe, it's not good enough for the UK either. And from Scotland, we agree with the tone and content of this resolution. We have seen nowhere near enough progress on citizens' rights, on Ireland, or on the financial settlement. On citizens' rights, I'm receiving emails on a daily basis that would break your heart. People who have made choices about their lives, about their residence, on the basis of rights which they face being taken away. Our first duty in this House is to them. On Ireland, North and South, Scotland's close neighbours and friends, solutions are possible. Solutions could be found. But we need to see a lot more seriousness from the UK government than we have seen to date. The Good Friday Agreement is fragile, it must be respected, and we need to see seriousness from the UK administration. And on the financial settlement, it says just how far the UK's reputation has been trashed, that the idea the UK will meet its financial obligations is news. Global Britain's first act is to walk away from international financial contributions. It is just not a serious prospect. And I fear for the future unless we see some real seriousness in these discussions. Scotland wants to find solutions, colleagues. We must see more seriousness from the UK in that endeavour. Thank you.
Mr. Batten.
Mi chiedi che se è una polemica, come non ho dato la parola.
Now, if there is any kind of dispute with other countries, I'm not going to give you the floor on that because this is a debate on Brexit. Spain is a democratic country and it is fought against a coup d'etat. Felipe González and Suarez have built a great democracy, so let's not have a war of words in respect of another country. There's not the time and place for that. Thank you.
About Spain. It's not about Spain, sir. It is disgraceful, I may say it, disgraceful that European politicians should exploit the tragedy of Northern Ireland for their own purposes. That is a disgrace. I think it is a point of order that we are not discussing. Well, if you're...
La parola all'onorevole...
I now call Mr. Batten.
Onorevole, io sono abituato...
I am used to respecting all members of the Parliament, but members must also respect the Presidency in return. So absolutely I gave you the floor to comment on an item of the agenda. That's what you said, but it's unacceptable, the point you just made. Mr. Batten, please.
Thank you very much. Now we're here to discuss the state of play of the negotiations and what progress has been made. Well, very little. And there are two main reasons for that. One, of course, is that you don't want us to leave. You're going to do everything you possibly can to make it as difficult as possible, to delay it as long as possible, so that either we end up with a very, very bad deal or we reverse the decision of the referendum. The second reason, of course, is Mrs May, who simply doesn't have a clue. She has neither the courage, the will nor the resolve to actually see these so-called negotiations through. But Mrs May has made some very serious and dangerous concessions already. What has she actually said? 15 months already after the referendum, nothing much has changed. She intends that we should leave the European Union on March 2019. We will leave the Commission, we will leave the Council, we will no longer have members of the European Parliament. We've left, but nothing much very changes. Nothing much at all changes. She said that we are going to incorporate all EU law into UK law, and then she wants another 2 years transition period, which will take us up to 5 years from the referendum, during which case nothing much changes on immigration, the laws don't change, and she has made one very, very, very dangerous concession, which is talking about an EU treaty on security and defence. We will continue to be bound to your military ambitions. We will continue to be bound to your security policy and foreign policy, and to all the police and criminal justice measures like the hated European arrest warrant. She has not got a clue, and what she'll end up with is a withdrawal agreement whereby we leave in name, but we do not leave in reality. Now, Mr Barnier, Mr Juncker, I don't understand why you don't actually make it easy for us to leave. Why don't you kick us out as quick as possible? Because then you can get on with your ambitions for full economic, financial, political and military integration. You can create your United States of Europe, make it easy for us to go so that we can get on with pursuing our freedom and independence, prosperity and our future in the world, not in the EU. Do yourself and us a favour, please.
Onorevole Wilimski.
Mr. Wilimsky.
Herr Präsident, meine sehr geehrten Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in June 2016 there was a referendum in Great Britain on the leaving the European Union, and 52% said yes, we want to leave it. A year and a half of chaos and bewilderment since on both sides is something that has not been professional. It looks like a children's nursery. I simply appeal to you, respect this democratic people's decision, and let's not play any funny tricks here. What you can hear in the corridors now is that there's a long-term plan to keep Britain in the European Union, with a second referendum, with slow negotiations, and a few more tricks of this kind, undermining this popular decision and boycotting it. I appeal to you, therefore, to respect the British people's decisions, deal with it fairly and professionally, make sure that neither side suffers disadvantages from this, and make sure that countries like Austria don't have to pay a single euro more as a result of this.
Mr. Wolf.
Mr. President, Abraham Lincoln famously once said, "You can fool some of the people all of the time. You can fool all of the people some of the time, but you can never fool all of the people all of the time." Well, the British people are no longer fooled that the EU want to negotiate a fair Brexit agreement, or even negotiate at all. From Verhofstadt to Juncker, to Barnier and to Tusk, the message is clear. The EU will delay, damage and deny Brexit. When President Tusk says the UK can't have its cake and eat it, what he actually means is the EU wants its cake, our cake, the morning croissant, afternoon tea, and finishing it with taking a pound of Britain's economic flesh washed down with a glass of subsidised EU Chianti. As Shakespeare said, this England never did, nor never shall, lie at the feet of a proud conqueror. It's clear the EU will not change its tune, so it's time for the UK to walk away and end this charade. Thank you.
Honorable Brok.
Mr. Brok.
Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissions...
President of the Commission, President of Council, colleagues, dear Michel Barnier. Well, listening to this debate, you seem to be suggesting that we were the ones behind Brexit, not yourselves. I think that is a misreading of the situation. I would echo what Michel Barnier has said, however, namely that we are now operating in a better climate than we were in the past. Some progress has been made, not sufficient, but nevertheless we have made certain advances. And I think that we should be clear about the fact that we are engaging in damage limitation right now. But some people here want to cause damage, and they don't want us to negotiate sensibly in order to try and limit the damage. There are issues, of course, relating to citizens' rights, to the financial settlement, as well as to Ireland. But we also have to say that we cannot endorse a negotiating strategy whereby financial issues would be deferred until we start to talk about a free trade agreement. It is in our mutual interest to resolve financial issues. I mean, there's no talk of anybody holding anybody hostage or to ransom. And Jean-Claude Juncker has called on all parties to stand by the agreed negotiating line, and that is the right course. And if we are able to resolve outstanding issues, then we can have a transitional arrangement for a limited period of time in order to win time for a free trade agreement or whatever the UK wants. But, you know, we're still not really sure, because, I mean, I have the impression that they are drawing up memos whereby they want to retain some kind of membership of the single market without shouldering any of the commitments that go hand in hand with that. I do hope, however, that we will arrive at a sensible result, and we certainly shouldn't be blown off course by all of this propaganda. This House has been extremely constructive, and we want to have a positive relationship with the UK in future, and that's what we're working towards. Thank you very much. Mr. Corbett.
It's increasingly obvious to all that the negotiations are not proceeding as fast as they should and have no chance or little chance of reaching the stage of being able to move on to the second phase. It's also growing increasingly obvious to everyone where the blame lies for this. The chaos, the confusion and the divisions within the British government. A government which is now a minority government, having lost an election on a platform of going for a particular form of Brexit that the public did not support. Mr. Barnier will recall the very first meeting of the negotiations. 1 year after the referendum, the British government did not put a single position paper on the table at that meeting. And here we are, 6 months after triggering Article 50, we have no agreement on the issues in the first phase of those negotiations, despite David Davis, rightly or wrongly, accepting the sequencing that was proposed for those negotiations. This is just not good enough. Now, the motion for resolution before Parliament hopes that progress can still be achieved by the next meeting of the European Council, only 2 weeks away. There is indeed another negotiating round. I suppose this hope is based on the fact that maybe after the Conservative Party conference has finished this week, there may be some movement in the Conservative government. I would say, don't count on it. Mrs. May's Florence speech was not so much to improve and clarify her positioning for the negotiations with the 27, it was to improve her negotiating position within the British Conservative Party, and it has clearly failed even to do that. They are still at loggerheads, they are still divided, and sometimes I wonder whether they don't even want to move on to the second phase of the negotiations because they do not yet know what kind of relationship they want to secure for the future. They're still too split, they are still at loggerheads, and there is still no clarity on that from the British government. Thank you very much.
Honorable Henkel.
Mr. Henkel.
Thank you. Well, I would like to make it very clear from the beginning. I was against Brexit. And Mr. González Pons made the point that after Brexit, people like Farage are leaving this parliament. Well, I would like to remind you, not only him, but all British people are leaving this parliament. And these are the last advocates in this parliament who are in favor of competitiveness, of decentralization, and of self-responsibility of a country for its debts. But it was, and let's not forget it, it was the Junckers, it was the Broks, it was the Verhofstadts in this parliament who carry a lot of responsibility for the Brexit in the first place. It was their mantra for more Europe, more centralisation, more socialisation, which led to the referendum in the first place. And it was their inflexibility on the immigration issue which gave the arguments for the Johnsons and the Farages to swing the results towards Brexit. To minimise the damage, we now need to do three things. First of all, Mr. Verhofstadt, people like you should stop this arrogance vis-à-vis the British voters. Secondly, Mr. Barnier, you should stop giving the impression that you want to punish the British for their decision. And here's a message to London. They should really get their act together and come up with a stable and unified government to face this Commission in this critical phase.
La parola, onorevole Berger.
Mrs. Bearder.
Sorry. So, Mrs. May's never felt at home in the EU. Well, she's not talking for me, nor the millions who voted to stay in and still want to stay in. We have millions of EU citizens who need clarity now with a standalone agreement, whatever the negotiations deal. But what Mrs. May really meant is that the Brexiteers in her own party haven't bothered to find out the benefits of the EU. They stay at home and think that the British Empire still owes them a living. Mrs. May is surrounded by Brexiteers. They're in control and she is too weak to deal with them. Brexiteers constantly blame Brussels for their own failings. They said, in the EU we can't control our borders. Well, that's nonsense. We can manage EU migration. We just haven't adopted the laws to do it. They say they have a plan for Ireland, but so far nothing. They said the EU stops us making trade deals, but we've over 50 international trade deals now. So where is the vision for Brexit? May's Florence speech has left more waffle, fudge and half-eaten cake on the table than is good for anyone's cholesterol. Prime Minister, get a grip, or pack your bags and leave now. We can exit from Brexit, so allow those of us who do feel European to sort this mess out democratically. Thank you, Mr. President.
Onorevole Scholz.
Mr. Scholz. Thank you, Mr. President. Not far from Berlin, somebody said on the negotiations, there was only one thing that was important for him: freedom of movement for workers throughout the Union. Production, development, this is one of the British world companies we're talking about, which needs to have a clear legal guarantee of that right in the future. So, Commission and Council, be specific. Identify specific problems. Where are the interests divergent? What will happen after and during the two-year transition period? Delegations from the islands are traveling all around the world, with WTO Public Forum, for example, trying to prepare future free trade. But the legal basis for that is totally ignored. Our future treaties and agreements with the United Kingdom must be constructive. These issues must be addressed as part of a world commercial chain.
Alla parola.
You have the floor.
Chair, as we debate the Brexit negotiations here in Strasbourg, back in Manchester, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is preparing to deliver his speech to his party conference. He encapsulates the disaster that Brexit is for my country. He was complicit in the biggest lie in the history of British politics, and with his Tory cronies has used Brexit as a power grab for himself. In her Florence speech, Theresa May said that the United Kingdom has never felt totally at home in the European Union. Personally, I have never felt less at home in the UK since the vote to leave the EU. Such a sentiment is echoed by many people, by the majority of young people who still consider themselves European, by people living in our diverse and multicultural cities, and of course by those European citizens who have chosen, for reasons of love, work or study, to make the UK their home. If Brexit is a divorce, then we are the children of the divorce, and the process is a painful and troubling one.
Honourable Flynn.
Mr. Flynn.
Thank you. The Commission's attitude to the wishes of the British people to leave the EU has been a disgrace. You would apparently rather harm other European nations by placing trade in peril than meet your own obligations to be constructive. If you were truly confident about what the EU has to offer, you would be content to let go an unwilling participant in the process of ever closer union. But instead you wish to punish us to discourage the others. Poles and Hungarians dismayed by migration bullying, Greeks and Italians disgusted by the consequences of monetary union. Britain is holding out the hand of friendship, confident of its place in the world, connected to a Commonwealth and to an Anglosphere, as well as to European neighbours. You, by contrast, are the hollow men, afraid that our success will show up your failings. We will not be intimidated. We will not be deterred. Once again, we will set an example to Europe. We are going to show that being free, democratic and truly global can see a great future for our country.
Domnule președinte, stimați colegi.
President, dear colleagues, it seems that we become addicted to Brexit. We don't have any plenary without discussing Brexit anymore. So I'm going to leave aside political logic and talk normally. In invoking Article 50, the politicians spoke, and now the negotiators have to do their work. If we in the Parliament try to get involved in the negotiations, Brexit will never take place. The interest is for the separation to take place with ease, without problems. And of course, Brexit is unprecedented because it's the first member state to leave the EU, and then maybe others will follow. At the same time, any member state who goes out might want to come back. So the European Union cannot follow the United States. We need a more dynamic model. The EU can only survive if there's a balance between central powers and local powers. And it's clear now that change is moving faster than our procedures, which are slow and centralized.
Honourable James.
Morning, everybody. Well, it's certainly Bash Up the Brits Day, isn't it? And can I give the Parliament here a gold medal for political bullying? Because that's quite frankly what we've heard so far. A number of people have referred to the lack of clarity of documents coming from the United Kingdom. Can I remind everybody that there was an agreement between both parties to keep those details confidential? And it's taken individuals in this Parliament to divulge and criticise the United Kingdom because we have not been forthcoming. Well, I've got more faith in my politicians that abide by confidentiality agreements than I had by a number of the individuals in the Parliament this morning. Now, one of my political colleagues back in the United Kingdom during the referendum campaign made a very, very strong statement, which is the United Kingdom should not be a star on somebody else's flag. It quite clearly appears to be that this Parliament wants to erase the United Kingdom from the flag, but it wants to keep everything that the United Kingdom contributes, be it money, be it defence forces, be it knowledge, whatever it might be. Well, if you want that, go back to the negotiating rules. Go back and understand what negotiation actually means. It means giving a bit to get something back in return. You have not given one iota. It's all very well holding 27 member states together in terms of unity, but quite frankly, What we're seeing now is a facade and theatre from the Parliament in terms of the negotiations. They are not serious, and the sooner this country, the United Kingdom, leaves, the better. Thank you.
Onorevole James, per sua informazione.
Mrs. James, the stars on the European Union flag don't represent the member states. Mrs. Hübner.
Thank you, President. I speak as the chair of AFCO committee, which in a year from now will be working hopefully on the consent procedure of this House. Michel Barnier said in his introductory remarks that 15 days and one negotiation round separates us from an important meeting of the European Council that will debate and decide. That meeting will be a chance for the European leaders to take stock of the results so far and decide whether to expand negotiating mandate, allowing for parallel discussions on the future agreement and the transition. But maintaining the new dynamics of negotiation process depends heavily on whether the Prime Minister's speech in Florence will get translated into new negotiation positions and concrete proposals as soon as possible. Accelerated rhythm of meetings has to go hand in hand with progress on content. And on content, 4 points. We need reassurance on how direct effect will work in practice. We need reassurance that bureaucratic burdens will be avoided. We need also to avoid the risks of incoherence and distortions in interpretation of the withdrawal agreement. And we need to see the respect of the fact that the situation of Northern Ireland is unique and deserves to be treated in a unique way. We all want to reach that deep and special partnership that Mrs. May has called for and which is of interest for all European citizens. But lack of progress now would delay the whole process of negotiations. That is why reaching confidence now and shared understanding on the essential issues of the first phase is of such importance. Thank you.
La parola onorevole Bresso.
Is it Bresso?
Grazie.
Thank you.
Di nuovo, grazie, Presidente.
Once again, thank you very much, President. First of all, I want to say that I very much appreciate the clear indications we've had from President Juncker, namely that the European Union should continue dealing with specific proposals for the future of the European Union and pursue that debate. And I would say to UK colleagues that it's not true that we want to keep you, but it's important that you listen to others. We listen to you, but I don't think you can say that we haven't listened to you. I think that our negotiators were very clear, and I very much appreciate the work that has been done. And I want to speak to 2 points. First of all, the question of the rights of European and UK citizens and their fate following on from Brexit. Now, the agreement, which of course will be part and parcel of the overall agreement, and the sooner we can explain to people who are waiting for some certainty, the better. They've been left hanging. Second point I want to make is that, of course, there is an issue relating to Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, and obviously we have to preserve freedom of movement for people of Ireland, and we also have to preserve the integrity of the single market. And as things currently stand, it would appear that those two musts are mutually contradictory and will be difficult to reconcile unless, of course, the UK and Northern Ireland therefore remain within the customs union. Now, there are other proposals, of course, but it's up to the UK Prime Minister to make the first move and come up with specific proposals. There may be a transitional period, but that does not mean that one can then postpone any solution.
Mr.
Krasnodębski.
Micro.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The speech of Theresa May in Florence brought about hopes that negotiations with the UK will finally accelerate, and this is what EU citizens expect. One ought to positively perceive an approximately 2-year transitional period and the fact that the EU will still pay its contribution towards the budget for the years 2014-2020. It seems that the aspect of safeguarding the rights of EU citizens living in the UK will be appropriately dealt with. Now time has come for the EU to take a step forward. We in Poland recently worry more about the rights of our workers in France than the rights of Poles living in the UK. The paradox of those negotiations lies in the fact that talks about the free market and the free movement of people take place whilst within the EU, under the slogan of fighting social dumping, internal protectionism within the EU is becoming ever more evident.
This week there's a visit from Copenhagen to London. The Danish Minister of the Economy with the head of the Danish National Bank went to London, and along with CEOs from big companies. And what were they going to London for? Well, they were going to try to attract some of the 30,000 financial jobs that are on their way out of London looking for someplace else to go. So for all of Europe, Germany, Sweden, France, etc., they can try to figure out how we can attract all these people. So it would seem that some people in the UK figured out that they're paying the consequences for a wrong decision. Now, in the time that's gone since the referendum, I'm impressed with how predictable their path has been. There are 759 agreements that they have with foreign countries that have to be renegotiated. How are they ever going to get that done? But this has to be done. And all of those who love the UK and are following this, we wonder that there's so much chaos that they can't figure out what they're doing. I hope that there's soon going to be some kind of realism in these negotiations, and I hope that the UK is going to figure this out so they can start being realistic, so that we can talk about the future, which is so necessary for the UK business and UK citizens to do well in the future.
Mr. Viegas. Respect for the sovereign and legitimate decision of the British people to leave the European Union is not compatible with threats, punishments or blackmail. Problems in the negotiation because of major capital movements in the European Union are not foreign to, not unrelated to a desire to reverse the decision. The neoliberal nature of the forces in presence and the class nature of the conflict make it clear that there's a desire to have a deeper security cooperation. Immigrants' rights have to be protected in these negotiations, including those of Portuguese in the United Kingdom. Also their labour rights. There has to be equal treatment. Social security, pensions have to be exportable, and mutual and academic and professional qualifications must be mutually respected. Mrs. Lambert.
Well, thank you, President. And I have to say that at some points this morning, this debate has taken me back to my teaching days, where you used to get the occasional pupil that would behave so badly they wanted to be thrown out of your lesson because they felt that that way they were going to have an easy time and not have to do any work. I see some have bunked off early today. So let's say here that this is a serious setup. It's a serious negotiation, and where we do want an ongoing relationship. Some of us would like the same one, but that isn't on the table. So we have to ask whether walking away actually makes this a serious relationship. And no, it doesn't. Aiming and continuing to say that no deal is better than a bad deal, or no deal is okay, is not a serious outcome. And does all of that show to other countries that you want to be a trusted partner in future negotiations? No, it doesn't. And let's also be clear that paying what you promised to pay is not a punishment. It's also about keeping your word. Thank you.
Honorable Annemans.
Mr. Annemans.
Voorzitter, collega's, ik zou onze Britse vrienden willen waarschuwen voor...
Thank you very much. I want to warn our British friends. They really should not underestimate the people opposite them. I mean, they are faced with a European elite which is bent on exacting revenge. And they want to adopt a strategy whereby they play for time, and as people have already said, they just want to spin things out. That is what they're doing, and that is why slowly but surely we're seeing this whole strategy end up in chaos. I mean, I don't think the European Parliament has, got anything to do with this. This is something that's going to have to be dealt with at executive level. I mean, I don't really see why the parliaments are going to do this. I have known Verhofstadt for 25 years, and he is exactly the right person you would want if you wanted to end up with complete chaos as a result of Brexit. Talking about Northern Ireland in these terms, for example, it's absolutely not on. There has to be a plan B for the Brits and for the independence of their country.
Mr. Balczó.
Elnök úr, köszönöm a szót. A Brexit tárgyalások során az
Thank you, President. Well, during the negotiations on Brexit, the main task of the European Union consists of protecting the interests of the 27 member states and, above all, to guarantee the rights of those Europeans who live in the UK, and, of course, the conclusion of a trade agreement, which would be fruitful to both sides. The withdrawal of the UK has to be ordered, of course, but for that we also have to take account of the interests of both sides. Would it be a fair agreement to expect of the UK is to accept the competence of the European Court of Justice, or are we being fair or just when we want to ban any contacts of them with trade partners? Now, I'm representing the interest of the member states, because if the British want to leave, we mustn't punish them, we mustn't sanction them, because that would only be risky.
Honorable McGuinness.
Mr. McGuinness.
Thank you, Mr. President. This resolution merely states the obvious, that not sufficient progress has been made on the three key issues before us. But I want to accentuate the positive, and I think Michel Barnier, Mr. Verhofstadt and others have said that there is welcome developments in the British Prime Minister's speech. Let me be very clear. On citizens' rights, I think we can make progress because we have to. We cannot let people down. And some of the banter in this debate will frighten citizens who are listening to it. So on that issue, let us make progress. On the issue of the financial settlement, I think there is a solution there, that the UK will meet and honour its commitments. They are an honourable nation, and I believe they will do that. But let me be very frank. I'm the first member of the European Parliament to speak from the Republic of Ireland. I listened with great respect to my colleagues from Northern Ireland who spoke here. Nobody owns the peace process, but let us salute those who lost their lives for the peace process, those politicians and civil society on all sides who won peace, so that my children do not see the violence of the past, and this Parliament, and nobody wants to see that. But just, if I may, President, make this observation. We want things to remain the same on the island of Ireland as they are today after Brexit. And that's why I say that we do need the United Kingdom to stay in the single market and the customs union. If that is not to be, then please tell me what will replace that. I want a solution. I am afraid I hear nothing from the UK side that will leave things as they are today. But we, with open arms, will welcome a proposal. And I think Michel Barnier wants that too. And in the negotiations, we will have to make progress on this issue. I cannot go back home to my constituents in Donegal, in Cavan, in Monaghan, in Louth, in Meath, in all of that constituency, and say that we are going to return to the borders of the past. I will not let that happen. Thank you.
Honorable WEIDENHOLZER.
Mr. WEIDENHOLZER. The Brexit negotiations need to be conducted realistically. For far too long, nothing substantial has happened, and it's mainly the British side's fault. We need now to get down to business. People are fed up with just hearing speeches. They need results. And we need a readiness to enter into compromises, but not compromises at the expense of certain problematic areas. Firstly, Ireland. We don't want a new border, and we don't want to revive old conflicts. But above all, it's a question of the millions of European citizens in the United Kingdom and Britons in the European Union. These are people who've made their plans for life under quite different conditions and shouldn't now be disadvantaged or discriminated against. We must all concentrate on them.
Onorevole Van Bossuyt.
Mrs. Van Bossuyt.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Beste collega's.
Thank you very much, President. Honourable members. It's extremely important for us to move forward in these negotiations. The lack of clarity creates uncertainty, and that's not good for anybody, not for either side. It's very important to have certainty about the rights of citizens of the EU in the UK. And of course, concerning the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and the financial situation, it's very important to have a good agreement at the end of the road too. And so I would ask that we not keep these two phases separately. It's artificial. At the end of the road, we'll only have one agreement, not separate ones.
Mrs. Harkin.
Thank you. Research has shown that in the event of a hard Brexit, the UK would lose 500,000 jobs, while the EU would lose 1.2 million. Crucially, they say that these losses will not be evenly distributed, with Ireland being worst hit, suffering a relatively greater loss in both jobs and GDP than even the UK itself. This must be factored into any final outcome of the negotiations. Largely, today's debate was positive, and just like the negotiations, it must be about establishing a cooperative future, not about settling old scores or, heaven forbid, opening new wounds. Today's resolution offers hope in the context of Northern Ireland, where it speaks of Northern Ireland staying in some form in the internal market and customs union. I believe the majority of people in Northern Ireland who voted to remain would support today's proposal, and it would fit in with Theresa May's proposal to exclude any physical infrastructure at the border. Those who represent Northern Ireland must be clear. Do they want a hardening of the border? Will they accept a harder border? Or do they support a unique solution for Northern Ireland that will avoid a hardening of the border, that will maintain the common travel area, and that will uphold the Good Friday Agreement?
Thank you. 1 minute, Madam Konečná.
Dear colleagues, from the very outset we knew that the talks about Great Britain leaving the EU will not be simple at all. The main problem, however, remains that the EU does not have a reliable partner on the other side of the table. The British government is beset by internal conflicts, and the situation on the British political scene is rather obscure. Prime Minister May is requesting a creative solution from the EU, but she does not bring anything to the table. And Boris Johnson keeps repeating his mythical lies about a 350 million, and the EU citizens in Britain and British citizens in the EU are still left in uncertainty as to their rights post-Brexit. Citizens are thus once more subject to a political power play which will affect their lives in a major way and their futures. I agree that we need to come to an agreement, but it's high time that we do that, because our citizens must not be our hostages, and we mustn't allow that. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Reinteke, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, dear Mr. Barnier, As a politician, I understand that political negotiations take time, that legal studies need to be conducted, that there are political games being played, and maybe I even understand that this side of this parliament wants to, make a circus out of this. But as a citizen, I must admit that I'm still completely lost on what the British government actually wants out of these negotiations. And I think that this is deeply worrying. And this is why I have 2 points to Theresa May, and I think she can clarify this tomorrow in her speech at the party congress. Finally, Madam Prime Minister, let us know, and the millions of citizens that are waiting for this, what the British government actually wants out of these negotiations. And secondly, and I think this is also an important signal to send here from this European Parliament, never forget that there is still a way out of this mess. The strength of a leader is not demonstrated by stubbornness, but by insight. You can still turn this around, Madam May. It is high time to do so. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you. Madam Zijlstra, 1 minute, please. Mr. Zijlstra. Entschuldigung.
Ja, voorzitter, dank u wel. Voorzitter,
Madam, thank you very much. As we've already said, well, Mr. Juncker has run off. I have been in the UK, and really nobody has any understanding for Brussels anymore. Mrs. May has made a proposal whereby people can have permanent settled status, and the EU has rejected that. It has offered to make certain payments, but the EU is clamouring for more and more, and it is rejecting any talk of a free trade agreement. And I have to say, have to lay all these allegations at the EU's door. And this is a country, after all, which beat the Germans, and Brussels is offended. The UK wants to leave the EU, and we are now hearing that Brussels has its own views about Catalonia, but that is a moral failure on the part of the European Union.
sehr verehrte Frau Präsidentin, meine sehr
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, as somebody who has both German and British citizenship, I very much regret developments since March 2016. I think Brexit is a historic mistake with serious consequences for the United Kingdom, and Brexit is absolutely not good. But of course, the effects on the single market have to be accepted. So we have to have a strong voice here in Parliament calling for an orderly separation and afterwards a sensible transition to our future relationship. A lot of people have said that progress is not clear yet, is not perceptible on the conditions for negotiation. The British side needs to lay the groundwork. And even after Mrs. May's Florence speech, she still needs to give some more clarity in her conference speech tomorrow. And we'll have to see in the next negotiating round what happens. Otherwise, there will not have been enough progress for the October summit. There needs to be an intensive political and economic partnership organized for the future. And in conclusion, let me thank Michel Barnier and his whole team. I think many of us here in this House have the feel that our European interest is in the best possible hands, in your hands, Michel Barnier.
Mrs. Sipper, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Nach der Trennung der
Thank you very much. Now, when the Beatles split up, Paul McCartney wrote a song, Too Many People. I quote,
took your lucky break and you broke it in two. Das passt zu.
And I think that chimes with Brexit. The UK government slowly but surely starting to realize that the referendum was their first mistake. and any notion of a lucky break is long gone. It has been broken into two. The indissociability of the single market and the customs union, as well as the financial settlement and full recognition for the ECJ, are non-negotiable, and we still have no guarantee of reciprocity and of equal treatment and non-discrimination between EU citizens in the UK and Brits in the EU. And this will also apply to children who are born post-Brexit, because we cannot have families made up of first and second class citizens. Here's another Beatles song, We Can Work It Out, which is apposite here, and again, that was written before they split. Think of what you're saying. You can get it wrong and still you think that it's all right. And think what I am saying, we can work it out to get it straight, or say good night. It is your choice. It's down to you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Van Dalen.
President, Mr. Verhofstadt has worked out a solution with other people, and at the beginning of the text they talk about the UK and the European Union, and they say that the European Parliament also represents the UK citizens and vice versa. And then he blames the UK for everything, saying that they're the ones who have to guarantee the rights of citizens. They're the ones who are responsible for everything that's happening in Northern Ireland, etc. That is to say, nowhere do they talk about other subjects like fisheries, like trade. We've got a vision which is just from Brussels. No citizens of the European Union, no country should ever think of leaving the European Union. That's what we can read from this. And all we're going to create is a loser-loser situation.
Flanagan.
Ireland needs these negotiations to work out more than any other country. Diplomacy is a bit like dating. If you want it to succeed, you need to be careful what you say. One thing you don't say if you want your relationship to work to your future partner is that there would be a dwarf without you. That's what you said, Mr. Verhofstadt, if you could come off your phone for a second. Another thing you don't do is run down their family. No matter how bad their brother sister might be, even if they have a lower of opinion of them, you don't run them down. Today, Manfred Weber did just that by demanding that Boris Johnson resign. I agree, I don't like him, but it is the British people's choice. You have made it harder today, Manfred. Another thing you don't do with your date is tell them you're in a hurry. Jean-Claude Juncker, you said you wouldn't have much time to spend on this. Another thing you don't do is make public what happens in the bedroom. You brought out what happened in private discussions. We need this to work. We've been bitten by Europe on Lisbon and Nice and on bank debt. Time to put your egos away, time to make this work, and time to stop insulting people that you want to work with you ultimately.
Mr. Briwa, 1 minute.
Oui, Madame la Présidente, chers collègues.
Yes, Madam President, colleagues, in this resolution you require the British to respect free movement of individuals and respect of judgments of the European Court of Justice. So we've understood the European Union wants to make the British people pay for their legitimate desire for freedom and sovereignty. Let's remember what's happened. As soon as Article 50 of the treaty was triggered, we saw an avalanche of demands and threats from the European Union, which is on the ropes, because the fact is the European Union is afraid. It's afraid the United Kingdom will do better outside the Union than in, which obviously could encourage other member states to follow the United Kingdom towards national sovereignty. The negotiations are actually a process of blackmail, which is unacceptable. But Brexit will at least have had the merit of showing the true colours of the European Union, anti-democratic and unable to respect the will of peoples. You can't negotiate with a revolver held to your head.
Mr. Schöpflin, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Anyone following the relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom since the Brexit vote will be struck by a number of factors. First of all, why is everything in slow motion? The Brexit referendum took place well over a year ago, yet the pace of discussions has been glacial. Second, the United Kingdom never seems to have believed that the EU 27 would preserve its unity. Indeed, the UK made a serious diplomatic effort to split that unity. This failed. Third, the EU's position was made very clear indeed in the Council mandate and in the various statements by Michel Barnier. Despite the clarity, the message never seems to get through. The UK side, when it responds, does so in vague, all too often unfocused language, or makes complaints of inflexibility or punishment. And fourth, the discussion in the UK itself seems to be entirely unaware of what the EU is saying. It is as if the UK has become another planet. From the outset, in the 1970s, and I was there, the UK never sought to understand what the EU was for. The attitude was entirely transactional. Equally, England, and I mean England, not the UK as a whole, has become intensely focused on itself, thereby making it very hard to see the EU as it is, a body of values.
Madame Beres, 1 minute, please.
Merci, Madame. Thank you very much, Madam President. Now, we were opposed to Brexit, but the British people voted in favour of Brexit. The President of the Commission, in the meantime, prior to 29th of March 2019, UK citizens will remain members of the European Union, and it is your job as the Commission to see to it that legislation is properly applied, and that applies to the citizens who are victims of discrimination before the UK even leaves. And VAT fraud, by the way, is a big problem. I mean, the UK seems to be a big problem in terms of imports from China. Gibraltar as well. It seems to become a haven for banking and insurance licenses. So legislation has to continue to apply. However, we need to look ahead to a transitional phase, and I'm going to surprise you, once again I should think, by saying that I actually agree with Mr. Weber, because the transition phase appears to be the be-all and end-all of this process, but we need an agreement on the terms of the divorce, and then we need an agreement on a future relationship, and I think we should stick to that. Thank you.
1 minute, Mr. Dzhambazki.
President,
Mr. Juncker and Mr. Barnier, honourable colleagues, I'm pleased to see certain progress in the negotiations on Brexit. Now, Mrs. May in her speech showed the goodwill of the UK to conduct negotiations in the spirit of compromise. And if we want to keep close relations with the UK after the divorce, we're going to have to quickly reach agreement, because that will reassure both the UK and markets and citizens. And I'm convinced that nobody would want to relive all the turbulence of recent years. We don't want the UK to be punished. Let's be constructive. It's clear that the UK wants to solve the problems of citizens' rights, the financial settlement and Northern Ireland. But we can't expect a settlement if there's not a good deal. So the UK has to be the best possible partner for the EU.
Thank you. Madam López Bermejo, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. During these months of negotiations, we've seen a number of different positions, more or less tough ones. What we haven't seen is any progress. People talk about the unity of Europe, about companies, about citizens' rights, but over this whole period, nobody has said a single word about workers, the great forgotten element of the negotiations. More than 12,000 Spanish border workers, who represent 27% of Gibraltar's labour force, whose jobs are at risk because their future status is not being specified. There is interdependency, social and economic, in this area, which is going to be changed, and changed for the worse, of course. Nothing is being said in the negotiations about how to protect jobs and workers' conditions. Every attempt to get a more beneficial Brexit has to wait on the economic interests of companies and markets. And once again, it's workers who are threatened, who are left alone and are the last priority in the negotiation.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Mr. Lewandowski.
Rok temu wydawało się.
A year ago, it seemed that the referendum would be an existential problem for the whole of the EU. There were other countries that seemed to want to follow suit. Today we see that the Brexit shock is a shock therapy for the EU because it has renewed our trust in our common future. But we see the problem of the citizens of the UK that they have brought about for themselves. We need to focus first of all on EU citizens' rights, the future of the Northern Ireland, and financial insecurities. That is why Mr. Barnier's strategy on the basis of the Parliament's resolution makes sense. We need to achieve progress, negotiate, but there is chaos on the other side. I would like to express my concerns. I have a right to do so because in communist times in Poland, which brought about certain risks, I used to point out to Britain as being an example of a mature democracy, a democracy that is not going to be populistic. But this was all fake news. That is why I'm so deeply concerned, but I am also happy that the whole of the EU is looking towards its common future. Thank you.
1 minute.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. President Juncker, early on this morning, most speakers said that Ms. May had been to my own city, Florence, to make a speech. And I have to say that the only beautiful thing about that speech was Florence, because it missed so many important points. First thing to say is that we have always said that the single market and the customs union must apply above and beyond the Good Friday Agreement, and it must be possible for goods to enter the European Union, but customs checks must take place. Secondly, when it comes to a transitional agreement, the European Union, of course, has to show flexibility, but the transitional period cannot be unregulated. Rather, the current standards of the European Union should continue to apply, including the 4 fundamental freedoms. Seneca said there would be no such thing as a favourable wind for a sailor who did not know how to navigate, and I think that that is exactly the problem here, because British people simply do not know the course that Prime Minister May has set. Thank you.
Mrs. Girling, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. We've heard the usual ranting from UKIP and far-right colleagues, fuelled by their diminishing testosterone levels. They state the obvious. They say they want a cliff edge, no deal, complete withdrawal, what Kenneth Clark called a calamitous act of national self-harm. Well, there's no surprise there. That's what they want. Be clear about that, colleagues. That's what they want. But I don't want that. And let me assure you that that's not what a lot of British Conservatives want. We want to make progress. Mrs. May has signalled in Florence that she wants to move. Let's speed this process up. This Parliament can play an important role in moving the deal forward. We're experienced in negotiating. We're experienced in reaching consensus and compromise. And I'd like to make one point about this resolution, the one point I do not agree with. I believe it's really important that this Parliament urges Michel Barnier and the Commission and the Council to move forward with a parallel negotiation on some of the issues that the UK is signalling are important. On the principle that no deal is agreed till everything's agreed, I think that would open up levels of communication, channels of communication that would show goodwill and the willingness to go forward without digging our heels in and being just as stubborn and just as awkward as those gentlemen that I mentioned earlier. I'm not with them, I'm with this Parliament, and I think that we could play a useful role here. Let's get on and do so.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Michel Barnier.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. Colleagues. In 180 days, this agreement reached by Mr. Barnier in his negotiations will have to be adopted and ratified by this Parliament. But what are we saying now? We're seeing a British political class which is not up to the level of what's at stake, nor at the level of its own people, and its only concern is navel-gazing. The problem isn't the future of the UK, otherwise they would have stayed in Europe. The problem isn't the European Union either, neither in, suppose, supranational technocracy, which only exists in their fantasy. The only obsession of this cynical political class is to try to conquer the circumstances or be master of the circumstances of their own party. And for that they have to lie, they have to deny, they have to betray themselves to be in becoming dangerous populists. We have to say stop. Those who think in the UK, like elsewhere, that the future consists of rejecting the other because we're too rich not to show solidarity, too proud to be fraternal, are deceiving the people, because it's not more wealth or independence that they'll find at the end of the path. It's more poverty and more isolation. Dear UK colleagues, you've got some days left to have courage and to stop this process, which makes no sense. If you don't have this courage, at least find the courage of clarity and stop fudging the issue, because there you'll be the only victims. In is in, out is out.
Mr. Lange, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam President. Mr. Barnier, Mr. Verhofstadt, I've led more than 14 legislative negotiations with the Council. But a situation like the one that we have got with the Brexit negotiations is one that I have never seen. This kind of unclear position of negotiating partners is something I've never seen. And as I look at the party conference in Manchester, who am I supposed to listen to? Mrs. May, Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Davidson? It's totally unclear, and that's not a serious basis for negotiation. It can't be. We need clarity internally for the negotiations between the European Union and the United Kingdom, but outside as well. Yesterday I was in Geneva. Our WTO partners want to know what will happen between the UK and the EU in the future. Here too there's clarity needed. Otherwise the world trading system will get destabilized, and for our future trade agreements, for example with Australia, we need clarity. So an urgent plea to the British government: let's have some clarity so that we can carry on negotiating. And we can thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt, for the good, cooperative and transparent cooperation that there has been. Let it carry on like that.
Mr. Kelly, 1.5 minutes.
I too would like to thank Mr. Verhofstadt and his team for his good work and for the resolution before us today, and also thank him for coming to Ireland 2 weeks ago, where he was well received, and like Mr. Barnier, who came in May to the EPP Bureau meeting, went to the north to see the position of the border. And thankfully, and I appreciate this very much, there is a determination to maintain the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement, the special circumstances of Northern Ireland and a seamless border. One progress that was made was in relation to a transition period. This has now been recognised, and I appreciate that. But one thing I would say, for a transition period, it needs to be open-ended. A minimum target maybe of 2 years, but not to set a maximum, because it is during that transition period that people will realise what Mr Barnier said today hasn't been realised until now. The consequences have been underestimated and the extraordinary complexity of the issue. So given enough time, people will realise that and then come to an arrangement that will be in the best interests of the EU, the best interests of the United Kingdom and of Ireland. The other point I would like to make is an awful lot of speeches, even here today. A lot of them have to be taken with a pinch of salt because they are aimed at constituents back home. It's grandstanding. We need less of the public speeches and more of engagement where it matters most, around the negotiating table. And I think that over a period of time, around the negotiating table, trust can be built and we can come to conclusions that are satisfactory to everybody.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mr. Jauregui Atondo.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This morning, we have heard support from Mr. Farage for Catalan nationalism, and I think that that is a fatal blow to Catalonia's aspirations for independence, because there would be nothing worse in Europe or globally to have Mr. Farage's support for nationalism, support from the extreme right. It only serves to underscore the fact that the European Union was designed to put an end to wars between our countries. Brexit is the expression of an old-style nationalism. It's anachronistic. We want a European Union, and Mrs. May has asked for a very long transitional period, which will then have to be renegotiated. Ladies and gentlemen, independence referendums really lead to all kinds of problems, and most often they lead absolutely nowhere, because nationalists fly the flag for independence and nationalism, whereas the future is Europe, a Europe which shows more solidarity and which is more democratic, as Mr. Juncker and Mr. Macron have told us.
Mr. Niedermayer, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam. First of all, I must say I deeply regret the decision of UK to leave EU. The UK is this way abandoned a community of more than 500 million people, the community that has an essential role in the future of our continent and the world. The economic impact of that is just one small part of the problem, but an important one. Let me illustrate it on the numbers. UK, by likely leaving the single market, will complicate to its businesses to join and use the market of 450 million people, while opposite way around it's just 65 million of people. In today's interconnected and highly effective world, any uncertainty means the losses of the jobs, lower wages and the problems in the budget and with the investments. Unfortunately, for the time being, it seems to me that we are not on the way to reduce this uncertainty. The reason is that while the EU27 has quite clear negotiating position, it seems to me that the UK side of the negotiation table is trying to square the cycle. And we know that squaring the circle is not possible, and we know that for more than 100 years. So it's time to act. I guess it's important that we can move forward, and the recent speeches of the UK Prime Minister shows the possibility to get improvement. But they must understand that there are some limits, and there are some conditions that must be fulfilled. That's the only way how we reach the progress and reduce the cost and uncertainty of Brexit. The cost will be here, but it depends if it's high or low. I hope it will be lower. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Madam Toia.
At least a part of this is to understand that you can't have access to the single market and at the same time build walls against community workers. As the English say, you can't have your cake and eat it. The Brexit supporters have to realise that it's bound to be hard for the United Kingdom and change everything. But we carry on asking for specifics from Mrs May. That's what Barnier's speech this morning was about. Parliament needs to be clear. No delaying tactics, no transition without certainty. You can't play around with people's lives. Citizens' lives can't be stuck into brackets for a certain time, put on the back burner until the right time occurs. And the British Conservatives have been playing party politics very often on this, and they will be called to account for that. Certainly there's no punitive attitude here. We want a settlement, but I hear a lot of fears in speeches here about whether people will be called to account for the consequences of their own actions.
Thank you. Mr. Hökmark, 1.5 minutes.
Madam President, thank you very much. May I first say one thing, and that's about a mistake that we must not make here in this chamber. And that is that Mr. Farage and his friends might be British, but they are not the representatives of Great Britain. Great Britain is much greater than that. They are loving the conflicts and the tensions, and they are, for me, contradictory to what the United Kingdom is and has been for Europe. I think Brexit is a sad thing. It's not a win-win, it's a lose-lose. In the negotiations, we need to be counterparts, but in the future, we need to be partners. That means that this is time for negotiation more than agitation. We need to require from the British government to get its acts together. And we need to secure the rights of citizens, to secure how we can deal with the bill, proceed with the Irish issue. But in the day-to-day life, regarding prosperity and regarding our big challenges, we need to be serious about how we create this divorce and create a new partnership. Thanks.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Geyer.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President, President Juncker, Mr. Wenger. Olaf, on fraud, the fraud prevention unit of the EU came across a customs fraud in the UK, which consistently underassessed the situation. Now, we're talking about €2 million as damage to the EU budget, and that's the calculations that have to be taken into account in the divorce costs for the UK, and there's a further €2.2 billion which have been lost in VAT. Now, the British government knows about this. Is doing nothing about it, though, because it's not in a position, and basically it has sent out instructions to focus elsewhere. The administrative recommendations from Olaf, well, I don't know whether they've been respected, and certainly they're not being processed in legal terms. So that's the backdrop, ladies and gentlemen, and bearing that in mind, I think we really have to pay close attention to how the controls and checks are organised on the Irish border. We have to bear in mind the integrity of the customs union, and if the British customs authorities are not doing their job properly, we can't lose out because of that. So please pay a lot of attention to this. We need to call for guarantees, and we can't see a repeat of what's happening right now because this scandal is ongoing. Thank you.
Mr. Leonard, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's been 6 months since Article 50. 6 months in which substantial progress could have been made on citizens' rights, on the financial settlement and on the Irish border issue. 6 months that could have paved the way for a meaningful conversation about our common future. And 6 months in which bridges could have been built between those who voted to leave and those who would have preferred to remain. But all we've seen in the past 6 months is chaos. A Prime Minister who is so preoccupied with her own position that she cannot focus on these negotiations. A Foreign Secretary who is the main cause of the Prime Minister's preoccupation. A House of Commons leader who said yesterday that the UK will take back control of its borders, its money and its laws in 2019, denying the idea of a transition period. David Davis, who first agreed to the sequencing of negotiations but now can't stop complaining about it. Michael Gove, who is too busy selling pig's ears to China to make any meaningful contribution to the process. And then Nigel Farage stands here in this House and demands a meaningful conversation, an intelligent conversation, while even he himself has said if he doesn't get Brexit his way, he would be forced to pick up a rifle. Well, good luck having an intelligent conversation with someone like that. So please, our friends in London, be serious, get your act together, stop your party political games and come to the table as a serious, united and credible negotiating partner. All our citizens deserve that. Thank you.
Mr. Zorrinho, 1 minute.
Thank you. For reasons largely to do with a succession of mistakes in the European response to the economic crisis and the refugee crisis, the majority of voters in the United Kingdom have decided to leave this union. The putting into practice of this decision has to be carried out in full transparency. Protecting the rights of European citizens and the future of the European project in the context of the treaties is an absolute priority. Portugal has a long tradition of bilateral cooperation with the United Kingdom. And that was something it was always possible to develop in the context of the European Union. Autonomy, identity and cooperation are pillars which do not cancel one another out, rather they provide each other with support. I'm using my country to make clearer the message that we need to bring out in Parliament's resolution. We wish to continue to cooperate with the UK. We have no animus against its people, but we must do this in the framework of the integration of the European institutions, their values and principles, with clear, transparent timeframes, guarantees for full rights for European citizens in the UK, making sure that the consistency in the integrity of the European project remain indivisible and protected. In a nutshell, the European project must continue to be strong and learn from the experience of Brexit so that we don't repeat the mistakes which led to it in the first place. Thank you.
Mr. Kirtos, 1 minute, please.
Colleagues, the time has come to come up with some initiatives to ensure that post-Brexit the EU is stronger and even more attractive. We need a serious discussion about the question of own resources in the EU and the funding of new policies. Don't tell me that the taxpayers don't want to pay for European policies, because my answer will be the same as David Cameron has said, and look what happened. There is no doubt that the City of London, even post-Brexit, will remain a strong financial centre, but it's our duty to strengthen our position in Dublin, Paris, Frankfurt and Piraeus, particularly as far as maritime transport is concerned. So the good negotiations from the side of the EU are up and running, and we have to link that with the view of a better future for the EU of 27. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Guerrero Salom.
Thank you, Madam President. 16 months ago, the people of the UK decided to leave the European Union. Those pursuing that imagined a strategy of cherry-picking, picking off the cherries that look juicy to them, assuming that the other side in the European Union would be divided and that there would be contrasted interests. But in fact, today, where you find confusion and a lack of unity is on the UK side. Here, we've managed to remain united on the negotiations. Parliament's resolution stresses the support of this House to the negotiating strategy being used by Mr. Barnier. This morning, we were surprised to see how the leader of UKIP and the leader of the National Front Group both keenly supported the independent strategy in Catalonia. I would just like to remind you that you need to note that we're talking here about two parties and two supremacist movements whose basic goals include taking their countries out of the European Union, the union that the other 27 of us wish to strengthen. Thank you.
Mr. Fellner, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. Nobody should be surprised at the negotiations and the fact that the divorce is going badly, because it's a phony one. Nothing's going to change. There's going to be 22 kilometres between Calais and Dover, and there is going to be an interlinking. The UK is still going to be there, and they're not going to move down into the cellar. Maybe they're going to move onto the sofa. I've followed the negotiations over the last 13 years in other areas. It's been exactly the same thing, but in many negotiations everybody comes out a winner, and you work out where the boundaries are. But here it's the exact opposite. Here we're negotiating on which borders are going to be put up, and everybody's going to lose. The question is just how much are we going to lose by? And really, there's no idea about what kind of barriers are going to be introduced. But if it's to succeed, then we always have to do the same thing. Clear mandate, a broad political backing, and the EU has a clear mandate and total backing. But the UK has to get its act together, because we don't even have agreement in the government about what is to be achieved, less still in the parliament or taking the people with them. So get your act together.
Mr. Tarabella, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Citizens' rights, the Irish question, these are two of the crucial considerations. Also, we have to stress the weakness of the UK government. We haven't got used to it, but it doesn't seem to know what it wants. It can't shoulder the outcome of the referendum it actually called for. So it's not united, and we're seeing this continuing. The attitude of Mr. Farage, I can't describe it. He was talking about Spain because he wanted to avoid the debate. His electoral success is something he can't shoulder because he's plunged his people into total chaos, and the UK population deserves more than that. Mr. Barnier, well, congratulations for preserving the unity of the EU and putting the citizens' interests to the forefront. That has to be the main concern of all of our responsible policies. Continue along the path, because, as they say in London, you're the right man in the right place.
Mr. Coelho, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, regarding Brexit, I have 3 brief notes for you on clarity, people and speed. On clarity, we are lagging behind. Article 50 was activated more than 6 months ago, and there's been no real progress in the negotiations. This dead end is of benefit to no one. More time is being taken to make speeches to the media than to come forward with tangible proposals. We heard what Theresa May said in France, but we're still not familiar with any substantial specific proposals. On people, there are more than 5 million citizens whose futures are at stake. Europeans who chose to live in the United Kingdom, and British people who chose to live in one of the other 27 member states. 400,000 Portuguese are in an unacceptable limbo. There's an urgent need for the UK to commit itself to upholding the rights of European citizens living there. Violating union law in a more or less camouflaged way and withdrawing those rights would be intolerable. Speed. It's important for all these reasons to take a decision and to do so now, to uphold the rights of European citizens and work for a calm transition. That means that the community acquis must be respected on the basis of the 4 indissoluble freedoms. We need a good agreement, and the clock is ticking. Thank you.
Madam Ulvskog, 1 minute, please.
Madam President, as many people have pointed out today, it's a great shame that the 4th negotiating round hasn't made significant progress with regard to citizens' right to the situation in Ireland and Northern Ireland and the UK's economic commitments to the EU. And it's a good thing, therefore, that we are requiring significant progress in these areas. But at the same time, why are we talking about the British as some kind of single collective who've made a well-considered choice on Brexit? We know that that's not the case. I myself agree with Mr. Lafrille. It's a great shame that the Brits are probably going to be leaving, and Mr. Barnier also, I agree with him. He started his work and he was assuming things would pick up after a time. So let us keep a dignified tone and still insist that we get an outcome to the negotiations.
1 minute now for Madam Spiraki.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Mr. Barnier, 6 months after Article 50 was triggered, progress is not clear, but there's an awful lot of upset as well and disturbance about what's happening with the UK. Basically, we're seeing the prospects of the UK being undermined, and they're not ensuring the rights of the 3.2 million EU citizens living in the UK. 26,000 of them are Greek. So it's our duty to give them guarantees, security, ensuring they have all of the rights without any major changes in their position and situation, nor of their children. Basically, we have to come to an agreement as quickly as possible. There are countries such as my own, Greece, which largely depend on economic growth and funding from the EU budget. Now, the decision taken by 28 countries and their commitments can't be shouldered only by 27. The UK has to accept its what it owes, otherwise it's going to be the weakest links that are going to suffer because of this. Greece in particular, I would say. And then there's also the question of the movement of the agencies which are based in London, and I'd like to raise the question here that Greece would like to host in Athens the pharmacy agency, the medicines agency, and we can give training to the families that would come in linguistic matters and also in the expert training as well. So I think that we should push ahead with that and send out a strong message for Europe post-Brexit.
Kofod, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. In Florence, Prime Minister May gave the best Remain speech never held. Ms. May touched on a range of extremely important issues: terrorism, climate change, the refugee and migrant crisis, global free trade, organised crime, territorial aggression. Issues so challenging, so dangerous, so complex that we can only solve them together. To put it bluntly, one could paraphrase Ms. May's speech like this: you need now more than ever to work together, so I'm leaving. Ms. May was very concrete on what she doesn't want. She doesn't want a Norway model, she doesn't want a Canada model, but honestly, what does the British government want? Nobody knows. And we all get from Ms. May is a desire, and I quote from the speech, a bold, new, strategic, comprehensive framework that is unprecedented in breadth. That sounds something like out of Yes, Mr. Prime Minister. Did Sir Humphrey write the Florence speech, one could ask. How can we negotiate a workable Brexit agreement if the UK government cannot state clearly what they want? Please, Prime Minister May, wake up, speak up. You owe it to your citizens. Thank you so much.
Mr. Karas, 1 minute, please.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like at the end of this debate to make clear once again that this Parliament, with a broad majority, has passed or will be passing a resolution, the logical consequences of which will be going back to the resolution and the mandate of this House in April of this year. And we set that up because we want these negotiations, because we are determined, we have made up our minds, we have a clear position, and this resolution is one that takes sides. It takes the sides of the citizen, of the peace process in Ireland, it takes the side of the taxpayer and of our legal, political and moral commitments. And this has to be the basis of the negotiations, because our common values and common law and common objectives are ones that we wish to have upheld, and those that shout out that they don't want that must always remember that they're on the side of nationalism, extremism and the violators of rights, and are using lies as a political instrument, as a tactic and a strategy. And the majority of this House is clear about the fact that you have to know where you stand when you negotiate with us.
Mr. Vaughan, 1 minute. I do beg your pardon, Mr. Vaughan, you're next. It's Mr. Liberatsky. My apologies. Mr. Liberatsky, you have the floor now for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. I must admit that I fully subscribe to what has been said, and I also agree with the form and tone of the speech by Mr. Barnier and Mr. Verhofstadt. I must admit that it's been a long time since I last heard Guy Verhofstadt in a less theatrical tone. There is a number of issues that are very important to me. First of all, a former member state of the European Union is no longer a member state of the European Union. And the second principle is people first. We want to be kind and welcoming to the citizens of the United Kingdom within the European Union on the basis that we have reciprocity for that. I would also like to draw your attention to the position of university students. The regulations that thus far indicate that their diplomas will not be recognized in an automatic manner. I do encourage us to agree that we should recognize those diplomas, university diplomas, and this should also be on a reciprocity basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Mr. Vaughan for 1 minute.
President, Mr. Barnier, some in the UK government want to blame the EU for the lack of progress in negotiations. But of course it was the UK government who, knowing the consequences, triggered Article 50. And now 6 months after triggering Article 50, the UK government still doesn't know what it wants. It's spending all its time negotiating, or rather fighting with itself, an embarrassment to watch. It can't agree amongst itself what it wants from the divorce settlement, from transitional arrangements, or from a future relationship with the European Union. And as they squabble, companies in the UK go bust, look to relocate elsewhere, and people are losing their jobs. Day after day now we hear bad economic news. And as they squabble, things get worse and worse. So it really is about time the UK government pulled itself together. They should be clarifying their position and negotiate properly. They should be accepting the view of the Scottish and Welsh government that the UK needs to be in the single market and the customs union for the transitional period, and indeed permanently. For once, the British government should put the country first before the party.
Thank you. We now move to Catch the Eye, and I would ask you to respect the 1 minute speaking time. Mr. Grzyb.
Thank you very much, President. Mr. Barnier just stated that in addition to the financial regulations and the Irish issue, it's the rights of a few million of citizens are our priority, and this is the focal point of our negotiations. We will adopt a resolution. Some say it's a hard one. It is harsh, but the more news those citizens get, the more questions arise around their future. This also affects my compatriots, the Poles living in the UK, for example, social rights, pension rights, also the movement of persons after the Brexit. So this also raises the question, will there be equal treatment? And also family reunification is an issue. The latest statements by Prime Minister May are encouraging, and obviously we want to see this also within Brexit, because Brexit, the UK is also a partner in the NATO and is still a European country, so we need mutual respect, and also we need appropriate content in these negotiations which need to be favourable to the EU. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lopez Aguilar.
Presidenta, ni este Parlamento Europeo ni los ciudadanos.
Neither this Parliament nor the citizens of the 27 member states voted in favour of Brexit. It was just a very slim majority of British voters. No, only then was the negotiating team put together under the leadership of Mr. Barnier to uphold the rights of European citizens and protect the four freedoms as interpreted by the case law of the Court of Justice, with an equitable share of costs. That's the proposal from the European Union. But on the British side, all we can see is confusion. We've seen deportations. We've seen social division between generations and different geographical parts of the United Kingdom. There's been a fragmentation of British society. That's the result of a referendum where reactionary nationalism and populist demagogy held sway. And by the far right, once again, we've had to hear them again in this House. These are the spectres the European Union has to grapple with. These are the enemies of the European Union, and it's our duty to defeat them, and I'm sure we will.
Mr. Skripek, 1 minute.
Dovoľte mi na začiatok povedať, že práve teraz je čas na spoluprácu a hľadanie prienikov.
First and foremost, I would like to point out that this is the time for cooperating. We must find a joint path catering for the Brexit, but it seems that at the time being we are trying to dictate how to proceed on part of the UK. Mr. Verhofstadt has required that first and foremost we need to have some kind of financial guidelines, but I think that it is important to understand that both sides have to somehow agree. We know that there are many things at jeopardy. Some 90,000 of Slovaks are living in the UK, and they need some certainty. Their social rights must be upheld, and most of them are in the territory of the UK with their entire families. We do believe that the Slovaks have contributed to the prosperity of the UK today. I am persuaded that our British colleagues will be prudent in whatever decisions they make to avoid any bruises or scars. I think that this should be a divorce that is an amicable one, similar to the one between the Czech and Slovak republics. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Madam Bilbao Barandica.
Thank you, Madam President. These negotiations show that neither the UK government or the Brexit negotiators ever wanted to understand that the Brits wanted to leave the EU. But now they're improvising and people are getting sad about it. And that's why we have to continue to negotiate quickly the conditions of divorce, including the divorce bill and the question of citizenship rights and obviously, we have to bear in mind the peace which has been brought into Northern Ireland. Obviously, we have to try to bring in as decent a situation as possible and hopefully offer purchase to come back to a joint life. We have to obviously support the values of the EU, but I think that people have to understand the real scope of their decision. We have to stress what brings us together, an area of freedom, prosperity, and an EU that we chose to have, building upwards, which brings us together in our diversity and allows us to speak with a single voice, and it's convincing. And obviously our future, as Mr. Juncker has said, lies in the Union, not in Brexit. Thank you.
Mr. Tarrant, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. I've been listening to this debate with extreme attention, even though I'm not a specialist in divorce issues, as I have been living with my spouse almost as long as the UK has been in the EU, and we do not even have an idea to break up. However, the key to harmonised and hateless divorce lies on the basis that both sides recognise their mistakes and don't blame it all on the other side. In my opinion, there is space for improvement in that aspect on both sides of the British Channel. And finally, if you allow me, British Conservatives, please don't hire Boris Johnson as your defence lawyer, because he is so untypical to the British people, a man with no good manners. Thank you.
Onorevole Epitideios.
Mr. Epitideios.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Well, the Brexit procedure between the EU and the UK should come about in a civilised fashion, bearing in mind the clout of the two sides. Now, clearly, the EU has to ensure that the citizens of the EU are protected, despite the fact that the UK citizens have decided to leave the EU. The UK government shouldn't hold hostage the citizens of other EU member states who work and live there, threatening to destroy their lives and those of their families. I would agree with Mr. Verhofstadt in saying that in Belfast the barriers which are fencing off some of the areas of the city should be torn down. And we also think that it's disgraceful that there should still be the Green Line in Nicosia, because half of the city is illegally occupied by Turkey. The European Union is responsible for this unacceptable situation as well, and so it must take measures to bring pressure to bear on Turkey in order to sort out this unacceptable situation which is undermining the clout of a civilized Europe. Thank you. Colleague Sindrova.
Vážený pane předsedo, já se domnívám, že Evropský parlament.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that the European Parliament has to send a clear signal in reply to citizens who live in uncertainty, be it 3.2 million of citizens from EU living on the territory of the UK or UK citizens living on the territory of the member states. Those account for 1.2 million. We say that transition period is possible. However, it has to be preceded by agreement on all key issues, and for that transition period acquis communautaire would apply. This shows that EU is capable of action and responds to specific problems, whereas the UK dithers and is unclear. This should also send out a clear signal to populists and separatists in other member states. I believe that Brexit is disappointing for me. All the more we have to strive to make sure that we have the best possible relations in the future. We have to cooperate. This is owed to those who voted against Brexit.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte, stimați colegi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, from the very beginning I'd like...
Vážení kolegové, od samého počátku
privind situația cetățenilor săi care trăiesc în Marea Britanie. Problematica
living in the UK. The idea that the UK will introduce visas for my citizens is a major concern for me and my country. The discrimination of European citizens, no matter what their citizenship, is unacceptable. So I am happy that we have this magical word in the resolution, reciprocity. We need to have equal treatment, and this should be the basic condition. Also, the payment in split 28 ways, not 27 ways. I think that they should realize that leaving the EU has a cost, and this cost should be assumed by the people deciding. It's too bad that the citizens who did not vote for Brexit will also be forced to bear this cost. But it would be very interesting to have a referendum after the negotiations are finished. Thank you.
Onorevole Marias, ultimo
The last speaker in Catch the Eye, Mr. Marias. Thank you, President. The Brexit debate shows the fundamental ways in which the EU works. The right for a member state to leave the Union is unnegotiable. It's the right of any member state to leave. The negotiations, which have gone for 2 years, should strengthen that right rather than to paralyze the right to leave. Efforts are being made here by the EU to hold hostage a member state which desires to leave. An effort is basically being made to hold this country to hostage because of the rights in Northern Ireland and therefore saying they should remain a member. Also, the court cannot take decisions for the UK once the UK has left. I believe that the European Union should focus on guaranteeing the rights of citizens of the EU who find themselves in the UK, with more than 62,000 Greek citizens included. Thank you.
Vi prego di sedervi.
I'd ask you to take your seats, please. Well, so that you can hear the responses as well from the chief negotiator, Mr. Barnier. Mr. Barnier, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Over the course of this dense and lively debate, this lengthy debate, I've heard comments that lead me to start by thanking Parliament from the chorus of expressions of support for the work my team has been doing and the leadership of Mr. Juncker and the Commission, but also your team, Guy Verhofstadt, and all the members of the European Parliament's Brexit steering group and the group leaders. We need that support and that confidence. We also need that unity which the vast majority in Parliament has been showing. Now, please forgive me for not replying individually to each of you, as is my wont. I've been listening to what you all have to say, and I will now make a few brief comments. To many of those who gave their views very clearly, there are two things which I simply cannot accept because they are far from being part of my way of thinking or my attitude, namely the words revenge and punishment. My feelings towards the United Kingdom are ones of great admiration, and that has been the case for a long time now. I often recall that the first time I voted as a young French citizen in 1972, at the age of 21, was once I'd campaigned in our referendum in France to approve the accession of the United Kingdom, Ireland, Denmark and Norway. Now, for a young member of the Gaullist party that I was at the time, that wasn't something you could take for granted, and I've never regretted that. Honourable members of the United Kingdom, I have huge admiration for your country, and you will never ever find the tiniest speck of the spirit of vengeance or punishment in my attitude towards you. Never. There's another word, Mr. Farage, that I cannot accept, which you have reiterated, namely ransom. No one is holding anyone to ransom. There's no exit bill. It's simply a fact that when you choose to leave, we ask you to settle your account. No more nor less than that. We're just asking you to pay in line with the commitments you've entered into. I would add that that's an important point if we wish, as you yourself said you wish to do, to enter into a new, solid, sustainable relationship in trade, protection of security, fighting terrorism, defence. We need mutual confidence if we're to have a sustainable relationship into the future. And the key to that confidence, amongst other things, is for you, objectively, to acknowledge that you need to settle that account. Now, there's a point that a number of members have made which I can't quite grasp. This idea that I, as a European negotiator, or the EU as a whole, is seeking to drag our heels, trying to hold you back and playing for time. Ladies and gentlemen, it was on the 23rd of June 2016 that the referendum was held in the United Kingdom. Theresa May's letter notifying us of the intention to withdraw was dated the 30th of March 2017, and we had to wait until the end of June of this year to start negotiations. We're not playing for time. You took the time. We respect that, but quite honestly, I cannot accept that criticism. And we are prepared, I am prepared, to speed up and intensify the pace of negotiations to the greatest possible extent. Now, a few points that I would like to ensure everyone understands clearly, or better, just in the form of some bullet points. Honourable members, the UK has decided to leave the European Union. That's its sovereign choice. At the same time, according to the British government, it will also be leaving the single market and the customs union. After 44 years of integration, I would recommend that no one at all underestimate the legal complications and the human, social and economic difficulties inherent in that decision. And I would put it to those who have made that decision that they need to shoulder the consequences. A second point. We respect the sovereign choice of British citizens. We are implementing the withdrawal that you have chosen. You want that to be in an orderly fashion. In many ways, it might be preferable for you to leave on the 30th of March with an agreement with us rather than without an agreement. That's a shared interest. We respect that choice and therefore ask you to respect the European Union. We ask you to respect the fact that we will be intransigent on the unity of the single market, respect for its rules of working, and the integrity of the European Union. There cannot be an impact of Brexit on European taxpayers. It has as a consequence that we weaken the single market and the four freedoms that are part and parcel of it.
Enfin,
lastly, all of us, including you, honourable members, as elected representatives of the people, we are all going to have to give an account of ourselves to our citizens. They are our priority. Their rights are our priority. We have to be able to respond to them, as well as our firms and those who for 60 years have been building up this European Union. We are the co-guarantors of that union. We share responsibility. And the account we give of ourselves at the end of these negotiations has to be a true, fair account. I shan't return to the various elements of the negotiations which are still pending. We have made some headway. We've clarified many points. I would say that it's in the general interest to take things in stages. There's not much time between now, today, and October or November 2018. If we're to complete the work on the Brexit Treaty, that divorce or orderly withdrawal. As it was at the request of the British government, that there may be a transitional period, and the conditions would be put into a clear framework with your resolution of last April, again today, rather than the Council guidelines. There would be a short period during which the whole structure of regulation and budget rules, the legal framework, the Court of Justice would remain. It's your desire that we have a short transition period, and it's up to us to ensure that the rules of the single market apply during that transition period. We're not surprised by the request for transition. We were expecting it. We will discuss it in due course. We haven't yet got to that juncture, but I will need a mandate to do so. I would merely add to Mr. Farage a legal point. The trade deal you think desirable cannot be signed with a member state of the Union. You have to have left. Legally speaking, you will have to have left. You will have to be outside the Union before we can sign a trade deal with you. So, ladies and gentlemen, throughout the ongoing negotiations, it will be our hope that the constructive tone adopted by Theresa May during her speech in Florence will remain and be consolidated, and that next week we will manage to make further progress. For my own part, given the responsibilities that have been vested in me, with your confidence and support, over the coming months, I shall be part of dignified, calm and firm negotiations reflecting the principles of the European Union. Thank you.
Comunico di aver ricevuto due.
Well, we have received 2 draft resolutions concluding this debate, one from S&D, GUE, ALDE, the Greens, and another from the EFTD group. That closes the debate, and the vote will take place today.
Passiamo ora alle votazioni.
That now takes us on to the vote, and we start with the state of play of negotiations with the United Kingdom. Yes?
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, I would like to call for your attention. I'd like to say something very important. In Tunisia, in the port of Sfax, 2 European citizens have been kidnapped, Giacomo and Salvatore. They are Italian citizens, and they're being held on their fishing vessel, which has been seized 18 years ago by the authorities. They have no food, no electricity, and Salvatore doesn't have his medicine. And I'm calling for respect for the fisher persons, for respect for work, that we should help Salvatore and Giacomo to come back to Europe, to come back to Italy. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Ciocca.
Thank you, Mr. Ciocca. Yes, I will immediately inform the External Action Service and call on them to take all the necessary steps, at least as far as the supply of medicine is concerned, for one of these EU citizens being held now in Tunisia. And I do hope that as quickly as possible they will be released. And as soon as I leave here, I will call the External Action Service so that steps can be taken from the European side. So, that takes us to the vote. We have the draft resolution from 5 groups. On paragraph 1, the original text, those in favour. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Paragraph 3, original text, split. First part, 1. Those in favour. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Second part, in favour.